All right, so I wanted to start by taking you back to when you were growing up. What did you like doing when you were a kid?
I had two things. I mean, all my life I've been in love with nature and being outside and being outdoors. So I was fortunate that my family were both Saskatchewan farmers in the southern part of Saskatchewan. They lived next to each other as kids and did not know it, and they met later in life. But they both had big farms. So during the summer months, we'd always be on the farms, hanging out with all the animals and livestock. But still, it's just out in these big fields with animals. And then from there, when I was 4 years old, my family moved from southern Saskatchewan up to the high Arctic to Baffin Island.
And how was that?
It was amazing. And if you don't know where Baffin Island is, you get on an airplane in Chicago and you fly straight north for 3.5 hours. And you land on this island that's windswept with no trees, that's icy and cold, and it's the barren lands. And the views are great because there's nothing to block it. You just could see forever in every direction. And it was an amazing experience that I look back on.
And you can remember that even though you were only 4 when you moved there?
I do remember it. It's funny because I think it was just such a big shift in life, to end up in something that was so new. I feel it was deeply ingrained into my brain and my heart right from a young age.
What about what you were able to do there differed from Saskatchewan?
I mean, normally when you grow up anywhere in the world nowadays, you just don't let your kids go out and play all night. And as soon as we were there, let's say I'm 5 years old now, and we would be out playing all night under the 24 hours of sunlight, or not maybe, okay, so let me correct that. So we didn't have 24 hours of sunlight, but we had, as a kid, to be out playing with 24 hours of light where you can see all night, and to be, your parents wouldn't worry about you because there was no real major threat or concern, in a community like that. Everybody took care of everybody.
And so you could be out as long as you wanted without mom and dad yelling for you?
Yeah, mostly. There's two phases to my life. Living in Iqaluit was one thing. That was a bigger city. It had sort of more threats that you get with a city with a population of, bringing in drugs and booze and all those problems that start to come into a community like that. But when we moved to another tiny community called Kimmerud, when we moved there, it was Lake Harbor. My mom was a school teacher. My dad was a settlement manager at the time, heavy-duty mechanic as well. It really was the true sense of the word community, where it was rude to knock on anyone's door back then. You never knocked on anyone's door if you wanted to go into their house. It's such an open door policy that you would just walk into any home any time of day.
Really?
Yeah. You would just walk into any room. There would often be a seal carcass in the middle of the kitchen floor, or a caribou carcass, or there'd be soup on the stove, and you would just, if you're hungry, you would eat. You would talk, or you would relax, and you would go back outside and keep playing. And if you wanted to go carve soapstone, you would go into someone's carving shed and you would carve up some soapstone. It was just a really beautiful sharing community.
So when you're 7, you moved to this community that has less than 200 people. In addition to what you just mentioned, just describe what the environment was like there.
It was incredible. Like when we lived in Iqaluit, Lake Frobisher Bay, the community was maybe 2,000 people at the time. I can't remember the exact number, but it was probably 30-40% white people back then, and so it had sort of the tension between the cultures, and it was just a town that was changing. But when you moved to all of a sudden to Lake Harbor, Kimmerud, it was a town that was still very set in its traditional ways. We never had a telephone. We never had a television. We didn't have radio. We obviously didn't have computers. We didn't have sort of anything that would want to keep you inside the house. Our whole connection and the connection of that community and that world was to the land, was to being out on the water, to being out on the sea ice, so that's where as kids we would play. That's where the elders and the hunters would get food for the community. Everything was in this outdoor world.
How easy was it to get supplies?
Well, your supplies came once a year by ship, so you would order all your dried food for the year. It would come by ship. They would drop 2,000 pounds of groceries on the shore in August or early September when the icebreakers could finally get through. Drop off these big pallets of food, and it was always a stressful time to make sure that you did your shopping right. You didn't forget anything off your shopping list. But I remember my parents discussing, how much did you get enough cereal? Did you get enough canned whatever? I grew up on powdered milk. You could buy some fresh groceries, but it was $6 to $8 in 1970 for a head of lettuce, and it was $6 for a little jug of milk back then. You just couldn't afford it. So we lived on dried food and powdered food and canned food.
What kind of pets did you have?
Didn't have any traditional pets. We had Often the Inuit hunters would bring over and drop off a baby seal if they went out and got the mom, and tragically, they would eat it. But if they found the pup, they would keep it alive and bring it back to us kids to play with. And I had a pet seagull that I had for a long time. His name was Sammy the seagull, and the poor bird, he had a broken wing, and which is how he became my pet. And I really protected him and took care of him and loved Sammy. But I really wanted more than anything was for Sammy to fly. And on the weekends, when I had some time, I would take Sammy up to the top of a cliff, and I'm like, "You can do it, Sammy." I didn't know anything about broken bones or broken wings back then, but I just through sheer emotion and cheering, I'd huck Sammy off a 400-foot tall cliff and watch poor Sammy do this death spiral back down to the earth and poof, hit the ground with a thud. And I'm like, "Oh no, Sammy!" And I'd run down there like, "We can do it, Sammy." Take poor Sammy back up to the top of the cliff and huck him again. And so I had Sammy for a long time, and fed him.
That's not animal.
So that's called true love for an animal. And and then tragically somebody in town got the only cat in town, and the only cat ate the only bird that couldn't fly. And so I had to say goodbye to Sammy, buried Sammy. But yeah, it's just my childhood.
What's this I hear about your uncle bringing you a calf once a year?
My uncle, I would go to the farm in the summer. We'd leave the Arctic for the summer when we had off school for 2 months, and we would go to the farm every year. And I've always been obsessed with animals. And my uncle would always say, "Here's your calf," and I would just love that calf. And I would remember his patterns of fur, and I would ride on him and hang out with him, take him for walks and feed him. And then every year I went back so excited to see my same calf. And every year he always had a story for what happened to my calf. But obviously my calf was probably on our dinner plate back then, and I didn't know it, but I was always sad to lose him.
So, when you were growing up, there were times when there were 100-mile-an-hour winds, it's 30 below zero, and here you'd be running outside, burying yourself in the snow and sitting there for hours. Why, and what would you do?
You need to entertain yourself. So I love to, if you realize the insulating property of snow, it was just fun to be out in a howling blizzard. Like, we did have wind. I remember one storm, the wind was over 100 miles an hour for a week, and I was a kid, and we just would love to sneak outside and bury ourselves in the snow. And we often did that just to see who could last the longest. Kids have to compete, and what do you compete with when you have no Xbox or PlayStation? You bury yourself in a snowbank and see who can last the longest before you freeze and have to go back in the house. But we had some bad storms. To one storm that several people died, and where people were lost on the land. And even my dad and the community went out to try, and we couldn't leave our house. We had a 2-story townhouse, and you could not see out of the front window because the snowbank was so high that it was over 20 feet tall, blocking the front window. In order to get out of the house, we had to tunnel a tunnel that was under deep, deep snow just to get out of our house. And so when the storm subsided, we had to basically dig out this whole community. And I know that they went even to looking for places like the correction center. The police station was a 1-level building they were looking for it, but they were sitting on top of it in their snowmobiles, like saying, "I know it's got to be here," but the complete jail was buried by snow. So it's just.
How long does it take to uncover everything?
Well, once they got the heavy machinery out, which was my dad's job as well, was keeping the heavy machinery going in the communities. Once they got out, they could use power equipment to start digging it out. But
and were people okay?
Yeah, generally everybody was okay in the communities. Just the people who were already out on the land who got trapped in that. A few people didn't make it back, and so it's a harsh world. It's an unforgiving world.
How do you think your parents influenced you?
I think, well, it's funny, neither of my parents were really into nature or animals, or I was kind of the weird kid in the family that after school I would go and, sit up on the hillsides and watch the shadow play, the light play shadow games across the sea ice. And I was always sort of a strange kid in the sense that I loved art. I loved seeing the world in light, in shapes and patterns and in light. And that always excited me. But my parents were, my dad was, I look back and he was a provider for the community. He was a strong man. He was an honorable man. He could fix absolutely anything. When in a community like this, it was just impressive to see the Inuit who were already incredibly gifted at fixing things, because you have to be able to fix things. But my dad was always in high demand, fixing snowmobiles, fixing trucks, fixing vehicles, fixing homes. I was just always, and my mom was I just loved how she got involved in the community. She would go into bannock baking contests, which where they make bread, or seal boiling contests, and we were just very involved in the community and very much a part of it. And I just really admired how my family was always very humble and very grateful, and just to learn that respect for other cultures and other people's lives, and it was always, I felt safe and felt like we could navigate comfortably through spaces like this.
What do you think they did that, even if indirectly, led you to taking the path that you took?
To be honest, my dad always told me that photography was a waste of time and money, and I needed to get a real job, and I needed to go off and become an engineer or, work for the government. And, that was that mentality back then, that you had to get a job, work till you were 60, you retire, and then you start living your life. And, and he resisted me on that. But it's so funny. When I wanted to leave my good government job when I was 26 years old, I had a lot of resistance from my dad. My mom's like, son, go follow your heart. You got to do what you got to do.
She was?
Yeah, much more supportive. She even would sneak me once in a while when I was starting photography. She would sneak me in and help me buy one of my lenses that I couldn't afford, or but my dad was pretty much against it. But once I set off on the path and it looked like I was happy and doing things well, he just wanted me to succeed in life. And once I showed that I was successful in the path that I chose, he was then very proud, probably more proud than anybody. It was embarrassing to go into his house, that every wall was covered in my images that I was embarrassed about, because you grow as a photographer. It's just like terrible photography. And he was just so proud of these big prints that I'd given him through my path as an artist. And so. You're
8, 9 years old, and you take a photo and your mom helps you develop it. How well do you recall that?
I was just, when you grow up in the North as a kid, you think that nothing is available to you. I think you look at this big world out there and you're in awe of the world. You're in awe of Jacques Cousteau. You're in awe of everybody who is achieving something in life. And I looked at everybody with a camera and I'm like, that will never be available to me in life. But you're just in awe. And I remember my mom had a camera. She had a Pentax K1000, the simplest of manual cameras you could have back then. And she had a little Lightroom in our food cellar, and she would go in there and she would shoot black and white pictures, and she would develop them, and then she would process these images. And just seeing this world, this black and white seascape come to life of Inuit hunters out on the ice hunting and traveling, I was just blown away by it. It was magic to me, and all of a sudden you see it with your eyes, and then to see an image get developed and come up and to even be a more beautiful representation of what you've just witnessed. I just thought it was a powerful thing. But at that point, still as a kid, you would never think that it was ever available to me. I didn't first pick up my mom's camera until I was 16 years old, but I was in awe of the process.
And she was taking outdoor photos?
Mostly outdoors.
Okay.
with the Inuit, being on the land. We traveled a lot. We would camp for weeks at a time, traveling across the sea ice, going on, hunting, and my dad, again, providing for the community and being out there with the Inuit, and she was capturing that way of life.
What was it about a picture you later took in college that you showed to a professor that really impacted you?
Yeah, I remember I picked up a camera and I started shooting, and I wasn't good. I didn't really grasp photography right in the beginning, and I didn't really understand how to take a good picture. But all of a sudden, I was obsessed with diving when I was 19 years old. When I found out when I went to the University of Victoria that I could, for $150, get certified in diving and go beneath the waves. And they had a really intensive course. And then right away I got a little Nikonis camera. And I took that camera down and all of a sudden just started shooting. And I started becoming obsessed with bringing this underwater world back up to the surface. And then when one of my professors, Dr. Fontaine, who's a world authority in invertebrate zoology, marine invertebrate zoology, I showed him a couple of my images. And he was like, wow, that is incredible. Can I get a copy of that? I need to use that for teaching my students. And I was like, whoa, I have a purpose. I mean, here's a guy who's the best in the world at what he does. And here's little old me with my camera who just impressed him in a world that he's an expert in. I realized that there was a role for me in visual storytelling.
Looking back, did that really mean something?
It really meant something because I was a terrible student. I was bad in school. I maintained like a C- average. Everything I was doing was diving. My dad sort of would indicate to me that I was a bit of a failure because my grades weren't good, but I was obsessed with this diving and it was getting in the way of everything else. And all of a sudden, to have this professor in my 4th year of university look at my images, to be just so, not in awe, but just so what's the word for it? Just so just impressed by being able to capture this world. I just think all of a sudden it just was like a light went on that I have a purpose now. I have a role, and what I'm doing, this path that I've been on, that's this very intuitive journey that I've been on is actually has purpose, and there is a purpose for me in this world with my camera.
I remember reading some story that you were trying to convince your professor not to flunk you in a class, to at least give you a D, where you promised you would never go into that field. But to what extent did you feel like a failure because you just weren't cutting it in school?
I was really a bad student. I had attention deficit disorder. I could not medically diagnosed, but I could never read a textbook. I could never get through a paragraph. If I was not interested in something, you could not force me to read that or memorize one sentence of it. So I struggled in school because I really didn't enjoy it. When I grew up with the Inuit in Baffin Island, your school was on the land. You went out on the land to learn about ice and snow and traveling and conditions and changing elements and weather. We didn't spend much time in school learning from books. So I've never learned to be a good student. And now you're in university trying to compete with this system of brilliant minds, and I was just barely getting by. I was not into it. I was not happy. But rather than run from it, I'm like, I'm going to finish school as fast as I can. And so, I mean, I dove 7 days a week. My dorm room in residence smelled like a seaweed farm. I was not popular. They were going to kick me out of residence on university because... Legitimately, because it stunk so bad in there. I had all my dive gear in there. I had very little money. I would go diving. I would often put my tank and my dry suit and my dive gear get on my little motorbike, and I would drive off the dives and go do a dive and get on my motorbike, but drive back to residence.
Wouldn't you wear your dive suit to class sometimes?
No, okay. I wore it outside a couple times in the pouring rain, just being goofy, but my wetsuit. But like my dry suit, which we use for diving in cold water. One thing we would love to do is on a really stormy night, we would get all our dive gear together, my buddies and I, and we would head off to the breakwater in Victoria when the waves were huge. You know, you've got 15-foot waves pounding this breakwater, waves going over, and we would just get down on these big blocks of concrete, and we'd wait for a wave to grab us and suck us off on a little night dive, and we'd be down there just getting worked by the waves. And, you know, all these things that were fun at the time, that's where we got our adrenaline. You know, they were teaching me skills that would go on to help me later in life. Same with the Inuit. Everything I was doing growing up as a kid, whether it was on the land, hunting, fishing with the Inuit, and then from the diving, every time I was sort of pushing myself down this path, I didn't know that I was building all the skills that would allow me to go on to do the work that I was going to do later on in life.
I understand at some point early on you would stay up all night writing on paper what you wanted to do with your career.
Well, it was actually, I was going into my genetics exam, and...
You had an epiphany.
And I had an epiphany. I was just like so miserable trying to cram genetics, which did absolutely nothing for me. It's important. I have a lot of respect for geneticists. We need genetics. Did zero for my soul, and I'm trying to memorize this stuff, and I'm like, I had 5 exams in 3 days, and I was miserable. I'm like, I'm going to fail again, and I hate this stuff. And so that ties into the same story with me writing a letter to the professor later in the exam. But I just, instead of studying, I'm like, you know what? Maybe I'm going to drop out of school because I'm going to fail this exam. I'm going to fail this course. I just can't keep doing this. And I just started to sketch out and do goal setting all night. I just started to write goal setting of what I was going to do with my life, the animals, the species, the storytelling, the conservation work that I was going to do with my life. And I just started sketching out this path forward for me in life. And as I did that, and I was like going to work for National Geographic someday, I was going to mostly specialize in the polar regions, diving under the ice, bringing this underwater world to the rest of the world. And I just started to energize me. And I'm still like late into the night, and I'm just like still going and excited. Went into the exam. Again, it was just another language I was looking at on that exam paper. I knew I was going to fail, and I wrote the professor a letter on my back of my exam. I said, look, I know I'm going to fail this course, and I promise you I'll never go into genetics. If you could just please set me free. I want to be a National Geographic photographer. I know what I want to do. I'm proud to be a biologist. I want my degree. If you could just pass me. And sure enough, I went to the board, and I knew I'd failed because I didn't even write the exam. I mean, there was no point. And I went and looked up on the board, and there was a D, and I'm just like, oh, thank you so much. Because you're young, you're only 20 years old, or 21 years old, and you've got this path in your mind. You can feel it, you could taste it, you want it, and there's sort of life and being young all getting in the way, all mixed up in this convoluted soup, and it just, at this point, just to figure it all out, all of a sudden you just got this little inch forward down this path, and it's like, yep, I must be on the right path, and you just keep pushing.
What made you feel that way at the time?
Yeah, just the fact that somebody believed in me. Someone actually believed in what I was believing in myself. A professor, I was scared of professors. They're like gods to you when you're in university, and you're fearful of them. And all of a sudden, I'd expect a stern writing back. No, here's your F. If you're going to take my course, I need you to be like, he set me free down this path. And I was like, okay, that's one step. Still had to get past my dad not believing in my journey of a photographer and all that. But.
Well, so you don't become a photographer initially, you become a biologist, and you were depressed in being a biologist. What about it made you feel that way?
I loved the work. The work to me, a lot of the work was very important. I love my colleagues. I liked the work that they were doing. I think, of course, everything's built on science. We need science. But what I didn't like is being a government employee in a government office. And I came into that with that same passion and conviction. I'm going to save the world. I'm going to change the world. And all of a sudden to come into this machine that just slows you down and almost steals your soul. And you sit there at your desk for day after day being ineffective, and I got this pretty high-ranking job at the age of 22 years old as a government biologist, and it took a year, but I took the first demotion I could to become a field technician, a field biologist, which meant I got a pay cut, which means I didn't have to spend as much time in the office. I could be out in the field helping other scientists who were very good at what they did, and I basically helped them with their field research.
Why did you feel like you were abusing bears?
Any species I worked on, again, the data is quite important, but to take any animal, whether it's a lynx, a wolverine, a wolf, or especially a polar bear, this dominant, powerful animal, this 1,000-pound male bear, and to run it down by snowmobile until it's defecating all over itself, or chase it by helicopter and it's pooping all over itself, and to stick a dart in it and it goes down and it's salivating, and you've taken this beautiful Arctic nomad and reduced it into a pile of sleeping fur on the ice, and then you cut a nail, take some hair samples, you put a big green lip tattoo into the skin on its lip, you punch holes in its ear, and then you take, on females only, you take a big satellite radio collar and you strap that around her neck. And when you leave that animal that I've always been in awe of, you've left this sort of bleeding green dyed hump of polar bear. And that's just not how I wanted to see bears. As for me to be sitting on the sea ice and to look out and to see a mother polar bear and her 2 cubs of the year, these 2 little cubs, and she's come out of her den and she has to catch a seal. She's looking down, and seals have 6 holes. So how does she catch a seal? No, I could watch her stationing her seals at each hole, and then she herself, when the seal would come up to breathe, the cubs would chase the seal back down, and you'd see the other cub pounce. The seal couldn't get a breath, and eventually the seal's panicking. Mom's hiding. It would come up. Mom would grab it, pull the seal out, and feed her cubs. But to witness that and want to photograph it versus turning that into a couple of data points on a sheet of paper, one didn't feed my soul and the other one did. So after 4 years of this, I was becoming more and more obsessed with photography and going down that path. I didn't know that it was a path available to me, but obviously a government job paid well. But at some point, now my mom's against me, everybody's against me. Do not quit a good government paying job. All my colleagues said, do not quit. And
what was their reasoning? Just good money,
you've got
security?
You're 26 years old now. You've got an amazing job. What are you doing? I mean, if you crank this out for 20 more years, you could retire. And I'm like, guys, I'm out. I'm going to go on a journey and see if I can make it in this world. And not many people make it as full-time professional wildlife and nature photographers. So then I set off on the craziest journey of my life, at that point.
Backing up momentarily, how do you think science is flawed in terms of just connecting with people?
I mean, often the best scientists that I've ever worked with, the most brilliant scientists with the biggest minds, with the biggest ideas, they're often, almost always, the worst communicators. They are left brain dominant people. They see the world in math and numbers and data, and they're brilliant. But to have them convey that message to the rest of the world, it's a disaster. They can't communicate. Once in a while you meet somebody who's somehow has both hemispheres of their brains developed, that they're amazing scientists and they're amazing communicators, but it's not the norm. And so that's where I started to see my role. I mean, I hated data. I hated reading scientific papers. I did not, I liked being out on the land with the animals, but I didn't like the scientific process. So I thought, if I could just bridge the gap between this important scientific work and the rest of the world by becoming a visual storyteller, now I see a role that I can play in this journey.
And I think when you quit being a biologist, you'd like $65,000 in the bank.
Boy, you're a good researcher, huh?
You've done interviews too. But when you quit, you had about $65,000 in the bank. Why decide to go alone to the Arctic?
I had saved up $65,000, and to me at that point it was an endless supply of money. But photography is very expensive. Just to buy my big lens is $12,000. To buy a new body is $4,000, a new camera body. So I mean, you can go through that money very quickly. So it's so funny. I went from 65 grand in the bank, just quit my job cold turkey, and within a year, if you just fast forward that chunk of time, I was flat broke, and I'd only sold a couple of pictures, and I wasn't making it. But to start off now on that long road of seeing if I could scratch out a living in photography. But to back up is when I left my job, I needed to essentially go, I hate to say it, but find myself, or to go process. And I was angry. I was frustrated. I remember.
Angry at what?
Just at the world, at life, at the government. Frustrated that I wasn't living my dream. I wasn't on this path with purpose. And I got this small grant to go on this expedition. I think the government gave me $8,000 as an artist grant, and I bought 200 pounds of food. I took my camera gear, I took my camping gear, I took my lifetime of knowledge of being out on the land, being out in the wild, and went up to a community called Inuvik, which is up on the Arctic Ocean, and I had him fly me a couple 100 miles or 300 miles out in the middle of the Barren Lands in May. It was icy and cold and just basically winter, and he landed me on a frozen lake, and he dropped me off there with all my supplies. And I took all 600 pounds of gear out of his little airplane, had a sled to pull things around, and I'd stopped in on the way to a trapper's camp to pick up an inflatable canoe. I didn't even know if it would work. And I began this 3-month journey of living alone on the Barren Lands.
How far were you from civilization?
I can't even remember, but because we didn't have GPS back then. But I was.
But far.
Like you could never walk. You were alone. And I just remembered this. The first couple of days when I put up my big tent and I'm sitting there with all my gear and it's just deafening quiet. A storm settled in like a blizzard, and I was just started to, like a little moment of depression of like, what the heck am I doing? What I just left my job and I'm sitting here in the middle of nowhere, and like, now what, loser? What are you gonna do? And I remember I find from being so frustrated with my work that I had all these little voices in my head, and they were always sort of saying, you're going to fail. And, everybody who'd sort of told me I was going to fail if I left my job, I had these little voices nagging me. And I remember just sitting out there on the tundra and being really concerned and scared and worried and questioning everything. And all of a sudden, after being out there for 2 weeks, I almost slipped back to my childhood, where I entered into this meditative state of being out in nature again, and everything calmed down. I started to see, wolves and bears and falcons flying around and eagles, and all of a sudden I started to feel home again. And then all of a sudden the ice broke up and the river came to life, the Big Horton River dumping ice out to the ocean, and I started to get my equipment ready to go on this expedition, and sort of all this negativity started to leave me. And just sort of as a joke, I remember my wife at the time knew I was at a low point before this expedition, and I'd mentioned to her that, at 3 a.m. while I'm sitting there packing, eating a big bag of gummy bears, that, I was watching this dude on TV I'd never heard of named Anthony Robbins, and I just mentioned it to her. So as a joke, she kind of slipped his book into my gear, and as I'm unpacking all my gear out there, I come across this book by Awaken the Giant Within, and it couldn't have been better, because as I'm sort of working through all these emotions, all of a sudden here's goal setting again. Here is if you can't hold a negative thought for more than 10 seconds. If you do, you have to start over. And I did these things as I'm reading this book, and all of a sudden it took me 30 days to do the 10 days without a negative thought. And all of that played a key role. And by the end of the expedition, after 3 months, I remember being out there, I lost 50 pounds and just hiked over 1,000 kilometers. I paddled hundreds of kilometers. I turned into this fitness machine out there. being out there in nature, and the goal setting that I'm doing, I didn't bring a big scrapbook, but I was writing on everything I could, planning out my future again, and all that affirmation started to bubble to the surface again, that I knew exactly what I was going to do for the rest of my life. And I wouldn't have been able to do that if I couldn't have had that clear time to think and reflect and be out there in fresh air.
So how do you get to the point then where you're broke and sleeping in your car in negative 40-degree weather?
It's like, no matter what, I am going to make it in this career as a photographer. And I went back and started to photograph and shoot and try and get published in every magazine I could, and newspapers, whoever would have my work. I would write articles for people. And it wasn't enough. I mean, photography is expensive, to buy the equipment and to travel and to go to locations and to live there on the land. And I went back to Baffin Island and photographed bowhead whales and walrus, and it was just an expensive pursuit, and I didn't understand the business. I had no business sense. I didn't know you had to make more than you were spending. I mean, some basic economics, and all this, before you know it, you're broke. But it didn't bother me. I kept finding ways to stay out there.
What was involved with being a tundra buggy driver?
I had to get creative in finding ways to stay out there on the land, to be around the animals and the species that I wanted to photograph. So I thought, oh, hey, I can't afford to pay the $160 a day to go be on a tundra buggy photographing bears. So I thought, hey, I have a biology degree. I worked on polar bears as a biologist, helping other biologists, and I thought if I could become a tundra buggy guide, I'm going to be out there all the time. So sure enough, they accepted my job application, and now I'm a tundra buggy drive. I'm driving around these big tundra buggies with anywhere from 10 to 50 people on the machine with me, entertaining them, teaching them about bears. But every time a bear showed up, I would, it wasn't as if I had the same privileges of photographing as a paying client, but I still got to shoot. And sure enough, lo and behold, one day I was on the buggy with Tom Walker, who's an amazing, he'd done some work for National Geographic, but an amazing wildlife photographer. Tom Mangelson was one of the most famous wildlife photographers in the world. And one night they want to see my pictures, and I'm showing them my polar bear stuff that I've been collecting over the years as a biologist, being out there. And they're like, this is some of the best stuff we've ever seen. I'm like, huh, really? And they were like, keep going, you're doing great. And so that was just that affirmation again, that little bumps along the way. That's why I mentor and encourage almost everybody I meet who are chasing a dream. Just give them little bumps, and it means a lot.
What was involved with getting from there to no longer having to take side jobs?
I remember one day I still had to take a side job. I came back from tundra buggies, and that's when the diamond rush took off in the Canadian Arctic. And I remember going and sitting there with this machine that you had to hand break granite core to look for diamonds. And so my job was to sit there for $11 an hour crushing rocks with this machine tool in this cold garage. And if that's not incentive to get back out there and keep working and chasing your dream as a photographer, I mean, it's just, and a lot of really great people along the way, people who did me favors, people who would say, come into our camp and come up in our helicopters, and maybe we'll get you out there to film the caribou, and just people helping you out along the way, and just doing all these little jobs where I really learned how to stretch a penny a long, long way during that part of the journey, which has become important in the work we do.
And at what point did you realize you no longer had to take jobs on the side?
Still do. I still do jobs on the side, but no.
I mean, but the photographs could sustain you if you wanted.
I think it was probably, I had been at it for maybe 5 or 6 years, and I was starting to make, I was at that point spending 60 grand a year, but making 70 grand a year. And I was like, I'm making it. And then, by the next year I was making 100 grand a year and spending 60 grand a year. And it was at that point where I got mentored by Flip Nicklin from National Geographic and Joel Sartori from National Geographic. They took me under their wing. One
of which you first wrote to when you were, I think, 17.
I wrote Flip Nicklin. My mom helped me write him a letter when I was 17 years old and explained, and I probably get 5 letters a day right now saying the exact same thing. I follow your work. This is my dream. This is who I want to help become. What can you help me with this journey? And he never wrote me back, and I was pretty devastated. And all of a sudden I found out that he was working filming polar bears, photographing polar bears for National Geographic. And I said to everybody, I don't care what happens, you must make Flip Nicklin and I come together on this thing. I was a tundra buggy driver, and there he is, and I kept teasing everybody. He was going all around the Arctic, and everywhere I went around the Arctic, I kept saying, you know, I have to meet Flip Nicklin, and you know, someday I'm going to meet him, someday I'm going to work with him, and all of a sudden one day I'm in my tundra buggy drive, and I'm working, I got my guests on board, and all of a sudden a tundra buggy pulls up, and it's Flip Nicklin, and he's like, hey, it's Flip, and here you're looking for me. I'm just like, and he goes, let's go have dinner tonight, let's talk. And so we talked, and it was great. And then,
No way.
yeah, and so I was just sitting there like, my eyes are this big, and I'm just like, I'm 27, 28 years old now. I'm just like, I can't believe this is happening.
So take me like into that dinner, like everything you recall from it.
I just remember us sitting in this corner, and I remember I was like, you know, sometimes when you're tired after a long day of work, you're eating like this. I was just so proud. And so I'm like, I wanted to say, I'm with Flip. And I remember then Franz Lonting walked in the room, who's one of the great photographers in the world, and I realized the respect that these photographers had for him, and I was just like, wow. And I was just very proud, and then all of a sudden, it was very interesting that his tundra buggy broke down the next day, and the company I was working with said, sorry, Flip, your machine's done, and we don't know what to do, but you're out. You know, we can't get you another machine. And Flip's like, but I'm on assignment for National Geographic. And I said, I said, give me that piece of junk little machine over there. Let's get it running, a different machine, a tundra buggy. And I said, I will come off the clock. I will guide Flip for free, and I will take him out for his week to fulfill his contract. And so we did. And off we went together. And for 1 week, he just told me, I just drilled him with questions. And he just said he was enjoying the moment. And I just asked him thousands of questions, and I helped him and got him in position and helped him get his shots. And all of a sudden, here I am with my mentor, my hero, on a National Geographic assignment, helping him. And I'm even shooting behind the scenes for him and stuff like that. And we just had an incredible time together. And he said, someday I'm going to help you, because you've got the drive, the passion, the commitment, the work ethic, and I can help you with the final stages to get there as a photographer. And he fulfilled his offer 2 years later.
Really?
Yeah. He just called my wife and I at the time and said, why don't you move down to Whidbey Island in Coupeville near Seattle. Move in with me. I won't pay you, but I'll teach you everything I know, and I'll help you get into National Geographic. And he did.
Why did he do it?
I think at some point in your journey of life, you get to be so good at what you do, and you've reached the pinnacle of your career. And I think in most of the great people I've met, they always ask themselves, how do I give back? And in this case, he saw somebody who had the potential to go all the way and to carry on the torch of doing good journalism, good conservation work, and good storytelling. And I think he just thought it was a good investment of his time.
How do you go about preparing for a shoot?
Wow, I do a lot of research. It depends on if I know the subject intimately. If it's a story, my first story I did for National Geographic was on Atlantic salmon. It took me 6 months of doing research. I had 600 contacts in 7 different countries before I even took a picture, before I even got sent on the assignment. So it's just a ton of research. And then you have to get all your equipment, and you've got to get your rebreathers and your dive gear and your backup diving gear and your soft no line, which is a rebreathing supply. You've got to pack your camera equipment. You've got to figure out where you're going to stay and how you're going to get that there, how much excess baggage is going to cost. And you just fly there with all your stuff on location, and you always put yourself in position in a staging area where you can work from there and go off and do your shoots.
And what's the process in which you'll research?
Just pick up the phone. I mean, things have changed now with Google. I mean, when I started, we didn't have Google, you know, so back in the early 2000s, you know, in late 90s, early 2000s, the internet was just kind of getting there, and Yahoo was terrible. And nowadays, with the tools we have today, but it's just picking up the phone and, hey, Joe, and well, Joe, you should talk to Jane, and Jane, you should talk to Bob. And, you know, you just keep getting sent down the path, and eventually you meet somebody. And my ultimate goal in an assignment is by the time you arrive on location, you should have done so much research that you sketch the exact images that are burning in your right side of your brain. Before I even go off on assignment, I have a sketchbook of images that I'm going to make that are going to allow me to tell my story for that issue.
And those images are what?
I call them, let's do a baseball analogy. I have every story needs to have one, 2, or 3 home runs, where it's just so powerful that someone's flipping through a magazine, it's just like bang. It is so powerful that you lure them into the story. You need to have a few of those. Then you've got your storytelling images, your point pictures, pictures that help expand that story, and then you love to end off that story with another home run or another couple of home runs. And you know, so I call them your first base and your two base hits are still important in a story to help win the game, but you need the home runs to really grab people.
And how much is that what you call pre-visualization?
Tons. I mean, I pre-visualize everything I do. Before I come up this coast where we're working on bears right now, I have pre-visualized where I want to be in the river. I know exactly what image I want to make. I know what lens I'm going to need to make that. I know where I want the light in the sky. And we say the difference between an amateur and a professional photographer is amateurs take pictures, professionals make pictures. You know, I only take 5 to 10 really good pictures a year. And if they're going to be amazing, then I need to pre-visualize the light, the tide, the current, the mood, the feeling that image is going to have. And in order to do that, so I have to know where the moon's going to be. I need to know where the sun's going to be at that time of day. I need to know, is it going to be high or low tide? I need to know, do I want the bear at the top of the tide or at the bottom of the tide, you know, of the tide zone. So you visualize all these things, and then you go through the process of waiting and waiting and waiting for that moment to come together. But that's the difference. Nobody has the patience to wait 1 month for a spirit to bear to come into the perfect location on a river to take that picture.
And if I could just back up momentarily, how do you invest in getting the mood and edginess right?
Yeah. How do you invest in it?
Yeah.
Like
how do you, I know that's something that's important to you. How do you do that?
I mean, a great image has to be evocative. It has to be powerful and beautiful and intense and wonderful. And in order to capture that, you have to have the right mood. It has to have the right light, the right composition. And the only way you can get there is by pre-visualizing this image that you're going to make, and then you set up and you wait for that all to unfold in front of you. You can't force the conditions, but the only thing you have is time. You know, when you're a professional photographer, storyteller, you put in the time until all the elements come together.
How much patience do you need?
Endless. I mean, patience shouldn't even be, when people say, wow, you have patience, it's like, yeah, of course, you have to have patience. You need passion, and the passion for telling a great story, for having a conservation win, is what fuels the patience. Because by the time when I visualize an image that I'm going to make, then it's going to come down. Sure, I'd love it to happen on the first day, but it almost never does. It may happen on the first week, which would be great. But quite often, it doesn't happen the whole first season, where you sit there, say in the fall for a 2-month stretch. It doesn't happen, but I just gained and learned and gathered more intel that's going to allow me to succeed the next year. So my narwhal story, for example, that was 7 years of going back every year before I figured that out. For 2 good hours of shooting in 7 years on narwhals. My spirit bear was 3 good days of shooting in 2 seasons. You know, it's just putting in that amount of time to succeed. And I'm very proud that I've never failed a story at National Geographic. Out of the 22 assignments I've done, I've been close. I've been really close, but I just persevere and push through and just dream of succeeding.
And it was funny yesterday when we were out with you. I mean, you know, we're sitting around almost the entire day, and then in the half hour or so before we're supposed to leave, all the action happens. What's the longest you've had to wait for before?
Again, you know, like the longest I've ever had to wait is, you know, going to film narwhals, for example, in the 90s. I would go there every year, and I would sit on the sea ice. And one day, the season was late. I sat in my tent on the sea ice with one storm after another, packing in the ice. And, you know, so for the first month, the ice didn't move, and didn't even have the concept of seeing a narwhal, you know. So and then go back the next year, bad conditions, but maybe you start to see a couple blows in the distance, and that gives you hope. And then going back the 3rd and the 4th year and getting some stuff, but not really the stuff you need. And going back the 5th year, and then the 6th year, I realized I need to buy myself an ultralight airplane and put it on amphibious floats and take off from the sea ice and go land out on the drifting pack ice. And that's how we were going to get those narwhal pictures. And that's ultimately how that happened. But it was just this process of learning to get these images, you know.
What's the longest you've gone without sleep?
I've gone for 2.5 days without food and sleep just on the narwhal shoot, where it just did not want to, we were in the zone, it was happening, things were happening, and we had to get it now. And we just worked through for over about 55 hours straight.
How do you last that long and be conscious, coherent?
When you've been chasing something for 8 years and it's in front of you and it's happening, you don't need anybody. It's the opposite of a government job where you watch the clock and you go in and then you do your 8 hours and you go home. I mean, it's just like you are so fueled up on adrenaline at this point because it's all happening, and you're so high on life because you are witnessing things that you've only dreamed of witnessing. You've been failing. I've been now failing for 8 years, and all of a sudden I'm succeeding. Sleep doesn't factor into the equation at that point. Getting the shot, getting the story, and getting these images is what matters, and that's it.
How do you think you've grown as a photographer?
I think I've matured greatly as a photographer. I don't panic anymore. I've gotten rid of all the little voices that come into my mind of, you're not good enough, you're going to fail at this assignment, you're out of your league, they're not going to like your work, they're going to see through you, they're going to see that you're a fraud. All those little voices that come into your mind at the beginning of every major shoot. You're never going to get the pictures. The narwhals aren't going to show up. The polar bears are going to run away when they see you. All the neuroses that feeds into your mind. And so when I mentor young photographers now, it's very much helping them deal with their little voices that we all have them. Where they try and beat you down, all those negative voices, and it's just, now I go into an assignment going, I'm gonna crush this. I'm gonna go do the best body of work ever done on this species and this habitat, and the readers are gonna love it. We're gonna educate people, we're gonna have conservation wins, and we're gonna make change.
You'll take 50 or 100,000 photos for a 12 photo assignment. Why?
The most I've ever shot on assignment was 100,000 images. I try and not torture my poor editors at National Geographic. I try and get anywhere from 20 to 40 or 20 to 50,000 images, which is a lot of pictures. That's over 12 to 1,500 rolls of film back in the days when we were shooting film. That's just torture to anybody to look at that much photography. But I've visualized it, I've sketched it on a piece of paper, I've burned that image into my mind, and I may get close over and over and over, but I don't let it go until I get it. And either better than what I visualized or almost as good, but I just have to keep pursuing that. And that means I've shot that image, like, take any example, an emperor penguin flying out of the water coming at me. I knew that was a picture I was going to take on that assignment. I got it the first day, probably good enough to publish, but it'd be okay. It'd be just an average picture in the story. Here is a situation that had a chance to be amazing. I shot it every day for 30 days. Every day when some penguins would come flying out of the water, I would be there to keep hitting it and hitting. So out of my 100,000 pictures on that assignment, 15,000 of them are penguins flying at you, and there's hundreds of keepers. There's only 2 that are really, really, really good.
What was the difference between those 2 and the rest?
Just that 3-dimensional feel. I want to transport people into my images. I want them to be there. I want them to feel what it's like to be next to me with an 80-pound bird going 30 miles an hour, flying through the air, about to hit you in the head, water exploding off his body as he's coming out of the water. I want them to feel that. In order to do that, I have to be close, it has to be wide, it has to be intimate, and that's where you get that. I don't want my pictures to be images that you look at. I don't want my pictures to be something that you look at in this sort of 2-dimensional plane. I want my images to be 3-dimensional, where you feel like you're inside it, you're in this world, and that's really, really hard to do with photography, to take an image where I've transported you into that image. And I think that's sort of one of my specialties, is really, really close, intimate portrayals into these animals' lives that people feel like they're there.
And how do the number of photos that you'll take on a shoot compare to other top photographers?
Some, like the wildlife photographers, Flip Nicklin could go shoot 20 rolls of film on narwhals and come back with a successful story. He's so good at visualizing what he wanted to do. I'm not like that. I need to sketch and feel and work my way into that situation. And for me, it's a long process of feeling with my camera. Everyone works differently. So Nick Nichols is another person I respect at National Geographic. He shoots up to 100,000 in a story, a huge number of images. Joel Sartori shoots 10 to 20,000. Brian Scary, who I work with, shoots 10 to 20,000. So my editors, I think, see my hard drive come in. I could feel them. I could just feel them.
What's the process for them in going through it?
It's a process of elimination. So if I shoot 100,000 pictures, they have to look at every frame. Every frame has to be shot in RAW. Can't be a JPEG because you can manipulate JPEGs. They need to look at every raw image. They want to see the sequence. They want to see your process as a photographer unfolding. And like my editor at Kathy Moran, my editor at National Geographic, Kathy Moran, the poor woman, she's amazing what she does, but she's like, you shoot every picture and I'll look at every picture. Never worry about shooting too much. And so she'll take 100,000 images and probably chop it down to 10,000 the first round, then down to 2,000, then she'll look at them all again. She'll get them down to 500 at that point. Then I'll fly to the headquarters in Washington, D.C., and then together we'll look at the top 500 images and we'll discuss the merits of each. And ultimately we get down to our 40 images that we're going to show the editors at National Geographic in a slide presentation. Everybody, all the mucky mucks at Nat Geo will sit in this little pressure cooker room.
Wait, and before you get to that point, it takes her how long to cut down all those photos?
Weeks. Takes her weeks to sit there and cut down to go from 100,000 images. And most people go through their pictures and they go, I like this one, this one, this one. You can't do that. I mean, my Spirit Bear cover, I never liked the picture in the beginning, but I kept seeing it. I didn't like it, but it was good enough to keep around. And by the time we got down to the final 60 images, it's just like, my editor looked at it and went, that's an amazing picture. And I'm like, really, why? And we discuss it, and I'm like, yeah, you know what, you're right. Then you all of a sudden fall in love with it. Now it's one of my classics, and I did not like that picture, but I had to see it through the process of elimination 10 different times before I fell in love with it.
So that room in DC with the National Geographic editors, you come in with how many photos and set the scene and what goes on?
You go in there with your images and you sit down in the very front seat. The director of photographers sits next to you. The CEO often comes into that room. They invite their other donors and supporters of National Geographic in the room. All the other department heads are in that room. All of a sudden there's 40 people in that room sitting behind you. And National Geographic is a magazine. They always say to us, you know, we pay you to make images, not excuses. It better be good, because David Duboulet just went before me. Flip Nicklin just went before me. Nick Nichols just went before me in that room, and they're the best in the world at what they do. They're the Wayne Gretzky's of photography, and all of a sudden you're up, and it better be good. And you have to sit there and you have about 15 minutes to spin your tray of 40 images, and you don't get to touch the remote. You're in the middle of saying, this was a unique situation where the Seawolf click, they cut you off. They just advanced over you while you're in the middle of talking, and you talk about dry mouth, you just feel the pressure because it's like they're not interested in what you're saying, or the picture's not good enough. They're all busy. They've got jobs to do, and they don't have time to sit and listen to you brag or pontificate or, you know, or make excuses or try and justify things. They just start cutting you off as you're talking. Yeah. So you're like, this was...
And still happens now?
Well, not so much now. I mean, I'm at a point now where when you've been there for 20 years, you've sort of figured out the system, and you know that they're busy and you don't talk for too long. But when I was first there, nervous and young, talk, you know, trying to give them as much information as you can, and you know, they're busy and they start cutting you off. I had one time, I came in with a story that was not very good on the Phoenix Islands. It was just a short assignment. The quality of the work wasn't great. You know, it was just a whole bunch of things happened. My editor and I, Kathy Moran, we weren't getting along about the story. She was calling me out, and she was 100% right on why it was weak, and I got defensive, and I went into this room, and Bill Allen, the editor-in-chief, he sat down with the remote, and every picture I started to talk to, he cut me off, and he cut me off for all 40 images. And by the time I didn't bring any water in the room, I forgot it. I was sweating, the room was spinning, I thought I was gonna black out. And I thought my career's over. Like this dream I've been just put 20 years into getting here, it just blew up in my face. I'm over, I'm done. And that's an awful feeling in that room with everybody sitting there watching you crumble. And turned out he was late for a meeting and he had to go, and he didn't want to listen to me talk too much. So he just kept cutting me off, you know, and the editor-in-chief turns around to everybody and they go, any thoughts? And everyone's like, no, okay, walk out of the room, no thanks, no pat on the back. Now that's the beginning of my career. Now it's like, great job, wow, good work, thanks a lot, you know, our readers are gonna love this. And so you do get a lot of positive praise, but it's kind of like being in the NHL, that you get a contract and you're paid to be good. You're not paid to do okay and get a pat on the back, you know. It's like, we pay you, you better deliver. It's a job, and it's a scary place to work. When you work for National Geographic, it's like being in the NFL, except there's only one team. And every time I said, like, I want to go do this story, like, who are you better than that? You know, who are you going to knock off the team? No, he's our quarterback. No, he's our wide receiver. Who are you going to replace on your team? And you start to think, yeah, I'm not good enough to replace people on this team. You know, you have to earn your spot on the team. And the only difference is you're only as good as your last story, just like a football player. You're only as good as your last season. You know, it doesn't guarantee you a lifelong career. And the same thing with photography.
What do you mean when you say the work is like your drug?
I think when you are such a visual person, for me, and you have chased something for so long, you know, when I don't understand drugs. I understand people do drugs, and obviously there's a major global industry around it. But for me, I can't imagine a bigger, more powerful, more potent drug than having a dream, and especially something as beautiful as a spirit bear or a polar bear or a narwhal that you've worked so long to pursuing this image that you know that you're going to help create positive change through this photography, when all of those things come together at once and all the little voices leave your mind and you've succeeded in this assignment. And the drug for me is just being close to these animals. You know, when so many people have fear of a grizzly bear, but you're sitting there 5 feet from a mother and her cubs in a river, and she's accepted you into her world, and she's feeding, and you're a fly on the wall. I mean, that's my drug. The feeling that I get in being around these animals alone in their habitat, helping tell their story, helping give them their voice is my drug. And that's what just feeds my soul, and that's what I'll never get tired of.
How often do you work?
Too much. You know, I work nonstop. I mean, I work every day, 7 days a week, and that's why I struggle when I try and mentor these young photographers. Like, oh, I'm going to go off with the family or paddling in my canoe for a couple of weeks, and I'll be back. And I'm like, you work every day, and when you're on assignment, you work 18 hours a day, or whatever it takes. You work 12 hours a day or 10 hours a day, and when you have a really bad weather day, that's your day to read a book or just to rest or to try and recover your energy. I love a big blizzard. When I'm on the sea ice and it's blowing 80 miles an hour and your tent's just like screaming, I'm like, I am forced to take some downtime, and I like that moment. But the rest of the time, you're out there working, and once you've done your job, once you've come back with all these images and your visuals to share with the world, then you've got to edit them, then you've got to get into lecture tour, and then you've got to do your social media. It's endless, but I can't imagine any other path.
So 7 days a week, on average, how many hours a day, you think?
You know, like one of the big things that I love to do is to go home and ride my mountain bike, you know, but I'm finding that harder and harder to do, to pull an hour out of my day to get on my mountain bike and just go burn off some energy. And but it just depends. If you're in the field, you're working, in a way, 24 hours a day. When I work in it depends where I'm working. If I'm working in the Arctic or in the Canadian Arctic in the summer, I get up at 6 p.m. I wake up at 6 p.m. I have breakfast till 8 p.m. I prep all my gear, and getting all ready. And by 10 p.m. I'm out the door on my snowmobile, and I shoot until 6 or 7 a.m. when the light's beautiful. I've shot through the whole night, which is now 24 hours of sunlight. So I've shot through that whole evening, and then I'm back and prepping all my gear and putting all my stuff and downloading my pictures until noon, and then I'm in bed at noon, and then I sleep till 6 p.m. And then so that's my cycle. When you're a wildlife and nature photographer specialist, you work to the rhythms of nature, and that could be, again, like working 48 hours straight when the conditions are right, or hunkering down when the wicked blizzard comes along. And
we were talking about this the other day, but vacation?
I'm trying to force myself to pick up a new sport so I can force myself to have a focus and have a vacation. The concept of I've tried to go sit on a beach and read a book and that I don't think I can get past 2 minutes. It just will never work. I'll have to go meet somebody and talk to somebody, and just learn. And it's just too interesting. Life is too fascinating to sit there and do nothing. So I've decided to pick up kiteboarding. So now at least I need energy, and it energizes me, and I meet really interesting people, and I'm out there forcing myself to learn a new skill, and I'm really loving kiteboarding right now. So I'll force myself this year I was able to get out 7 days this year out of my kiteboard, which was a record for me.
That means 7 days of total vacation? this year?
Yeah, but you're still meeting people and talking and writing in your journal and getting new ideas and planning new assignments. But to go offline, away from the internet, away from a phone, to be out in nature, just you and the wind and your kite out on a lake all day is a very powerful thing. And I come back just jazzed. But then of course I'm goal setting again. Always thinking of the future.
How healthy do you think it is not taking?
I think it's unhealthy. A lot of my best ideas come to me during a blizzard when I'm forced to hunker down, when I'm forced to do. It's basically anytime I take a break, I get new big ideas. So the more time I can take off, but I'm with my partner, Christina Minnemeyer, who's I think will literally save the planet. And I'm just trying to keep up to her. And as soon as I take a couple hours off, she looks at me and like, don't we have stuff to do? We need to get on this conference call, phone this person, do this. And it's just, you balance that with having to come home I'm on the road 10 months a year, and to come home for those 2 months, and all of a sudden you have to fix your boat, you got to fix your house, you got to deal with this and this and that. But I'm on this conveyor belt of life, and it's pretty darn exciting,
What are the drawbacks of being on the road 10 months a year?
Fitness. People think you're a photographer out there, but it's being in hotels. It's not eating the way you want to eat. It's not getting enough fitness, not having a routine. When I'm home for 3 weeks, it's amazing how much better I feel just eating right every day, working out every day, in this routine, waking up in your bed, feeling so energized and refreshed. But our lives are out on the road, and that's where we have to go. So I'm trying to find ways to really, every hotel I ever stay in, everywhere I go, I need some sort of form of fitness, and just learning to do more yoga and more stuff on the fly.
How does it impact the personal life?
It was brutal. I was married to a great lady in the Yukon, for 20 years, and just seeing her for a month a year is not a normal marriage. We never had any kids, but you just really grow apart with that person if you see them a month a year, 11 months apart. Or a really good year I'd be home 4 months. In the worst years I was home a month.
Would she come and visit you?
Sometimes, but generally what I do is not a very romantic job. It's sitting in sort of uncomfortable places and grinding it out. And so very rarely did she ever come in the field to see me, and 20 years of that, and it's just hard on a marriage. So now my new partner is she does exactly what I do. We travel almost always together. We do our work together, and it's just much healthier.
Why decide against having kids?
My first wife, she couldn't have kids, and it was just, I love kids, and my better answer is, I decided early on we could have had kids. Is the truth there, but I decided early on not to have kids. When I'm sitting here preaching on climate change and the impact we're having on this planet, I'm always saying, what's the ultimate sacrifice? And it's not having kids. And also, when you're gone 10 months a year, 11 months a year, you're not going to be a very good dad. So my kids became the environment, became nature, being out there, trying to protect our planet has become sort of my fatherhood and my dedication to that. And people are always like, wow, you're really excited to meet my kids. So I think when I meet other people's kids, I get a little excited. I want to wrestle and play with them and play catch and go swimming and goof around with them. I just love other people's kids, and that's been a good part of the journey.
How much of a struggle, if at all, was that for you in balancing whether or not you wanted to have kids with the passion for the work that you were doing?
That's always was my biggest struggle. Is I was obsessed with my work. I loved every bit about it, but I realized it wasn't life. It wasn't a normal life. And I would always look at normal lives, and I would come to visit my friends when I'd get home from these expeditions, and they'd be having a barbecue by a lake with their family, and they would all be having normal conversations, But I had just come back from a 3-month solo expedition of living with the wolves and the bears, which was my drug. But all of a sudden I went, wait a minute, and it was hard because I would look at their lives and I became not envious. The Inuit have a beautiful word. It's called tushu. It's in their culture, they don't have something of jealousy. Jealousy is not healthy, but tushu means I'm happy for you, but I wish for the same for myself. So I found myself craving this other world of family and kids and normalcy and routine. And it still sort of haunts me to this day that I don't have that. I'll never have that. I'll never have that normal life of sitting around with my kids and kids that I've conceived and watched grow up and watch them. When I go to like National Geographic, I stay with really good friends, and I've known their kids since they were 2 years old, and now they're 14 years old, and I just love them like they're my own. I have my godchildren who I'm so proud of, and but I'll never have that feeling of, I love the concept of being a dad and passing on your knowledge, and if I could have had time for that, I would have loved that.
Brushes with death. Why has your loss of fear bothered you?
I think that every time I'm about to do something dangerous, whether it's getting in the water with a leopard seal or a polar bear coming up on you, and again, I can talk about near-death experiences. For every near-death experience I've had 10,000 beautiful experiences. So those bad experiences sort of fade from your mind. The scariest things that have ever happened to me generally have happened in a car on a highway, icy conditions, in the rain. So it's not like I have a whole bunch of near-death experiences with animals, but almost all of my near-death experiences have come at my own hand, falling through the sea ice, I've crashed 2 airplanes, those types of near-death experiences. But sorry, what was your question?
It's like, you haven't had that many, and then you're listing them off. I'm like, well, that's a lot more than most people. But how has your loss of fear started bothering you?
Yeah, it's bothered every time I'm about to do something dangerous, and that's say to get in the water, not even dangerous, but unknown, and you're about to get in the water with a 1,000-pound predator, or a 1,000-pound grizzly bear walks up to you, and everything in your body, your gut, your instincts are saying, this is bad, you're gonna die. And through what I do with my work is you've learned to ignore these things. When I take off in a storm in my ultralighter in bad weather and I'm pushing myself to go get these images, your body's saying, don't do this. And I've called that the gray area. And I would just say that fine line of what's gonna kill you and what isn't has turned into this big muddy gray area for me. And when you constantly ignore your body's reaction to say, don't do it, and you survive, you've just sort of taken a step further into pushing those limits. And so that's what I'm scared of right now, that I'm like, I've done all these other things where my stomach has told me that I'm gonna die if I do this, and you lived. And so now you just keep pushing it and pushing it and pushing it. So now I'm at a point where I think I've pushed the limits of death, or the limits of what's possible and what isn't. And I'm at the point now where I'm starting to listen to my gut a little more. I don't want.
You are?
Yeah, definitely. I'm definitely slowing down in the sense that I won't push myself to 220 feet on a dive. I'm watching my friends die around. My friend Rob Stewart just died on a rebreather. He was a guy who was going to save the world, and he was going to live forever. And when your friends around you die, I was working in the Canadian Arctic a few years ago, and working with a close friend of mine on our snowmobiles, and we fell through the ice a couple times, and we were able to get ourselves out, and it was almost fun and adventurous. And then I went back home, and 2 days later I get a call that he went through the ice on a snowmobile and died. And you're just like, you start to realize that you are not invincible, that you will die if you keep pushing too hard. And so, and my friend Joel Sartori always tells me you can't take pictures when you're dead. So it's my goal now is to stay alive and stay in the game, and keep doing what I'm doing. And sometimes I have to say no to dangerous situations.
Are there other ways in which you found yourself cutting back in terms of staying away from some of the danger?
Not really. I mean, I think so. Flying my ultralight airplane, I started to realize that after 2 airplane crashes and 5 engine failures, of trying to do something, flying is one thing, but trying to switch hands when you're in the cockpit, you take the doors off your little pusher ultralight and you got your camera, and you're trying to, work with, fly and shoot at the same time, low level over the trees near mountains, to get a B-level photograph was not a smart use of time. And luckily, new technology is coming out. I have now crashed over 10 drones and destroyed a few into the ocean and lost them forever, and I'm fine. Let's use that technology and actually the visuals and I'm obsessed with flying, but I love flying, but it's, just leave that for flying, and don't try and involve work and mix those two worlds. But I've done some really, now that you got me thinking about it, done some stupid stuff, like trying to get aerials in the Arctic before I bought my ultralight airplane to film narwhals. I hooked up a parasail that we had shipped through the mail that we had never opened before. We threw it out on the sea ice. I hooked it up to a snowmobile and told my buddy just to yank me off the ice. And all of a sudden I'm 400 feet up in the air behind a snowmobile with a parasail, and the back of the snowmobile's coming up. So my buddy jumped on the back of the, ran up and jumped on the back of the snowmobile to keep it down. Then a crack opened up in the ice, and there's a tailwind, and I fell the final 100 feet. When the parasail came down, I bounced off the ice, sort of ended up in this big slushy hole. My Inuit guy just stood over me going, oh, laughing, because it was like a nervous laugh. He thought for sure I was dead. I was surprised I wasn't dead. And I mean, just stuff like that. I'm going to stop doing stupid stuff. I want to start eliminating stupid stuff and just cowboy decisions and just be a little more calculated and thoughtful.
So when you go down in cold water, describe the feeling and why you vomit.
I used to vomit. Now I work with a manufacturer called Waterproof Diving out of Sweden, and I help them custom design some of their ice diving stuff, so I no longer have the vomiting issue when I go down. But
what's the difference?
The difference is just wearing equipment that was so thin, designed for diving in British Columbia, thin hoods, thin neoprene, just not properly fitting gear. You know, have you ever had an ice cream headache where you drink a Slurpee, one of your Starbucks drinks too fast? You get that ice cream headache, except you get that over your entire head. And just for some reason with my body's reaction is just to start puking. But now I wear enough equipment now, much better designed hoods and stuff, that problem doesn't happen. But
because you're warmer now.
Just warmer, like a big 10 millimeter proper fitting hood that's, you know, just tight around your face as to a really poor fitting thin neoprene hood. It's just a massive difference.
Can you still not feel yourself when you're taking photos?
Oh yeah, I mean, you still have all those problems. So I mean, you go down, so I just don't vomit anymore, but within 5 minutes you lose all feeling in your lips and your face, and within 15 to 20 minutes, you lose all feeling in your extremities, your hands, your feet. Everything gets extremely cold. That feeling goes away. After about half an hour to 40 minutes of diving in water that's 28, 29 degrees Fahrenheit, you start to shiver after 40 minutes. Your body's reaction is trying to warm you up. You're just cold, almost to the point your teeth are chattering on your rag. You're just, and after about an hour of that, the shivering stops. You haven't felt your extremities for 40 minutes. Your body's going into something it's like a blood shunting, where it's keeping the blood to your heart, to your core, to your brain. It's removing it from your extremities, trying to keep you alive. And from there, at that point, when you start to cramp up, the shivering stopped. If you're not getting out of the water by then, you're in trouble. And I've found myself pushing it to that point a few times. And that's another indicator now that I get out when the shivering starts. I don't wait to the point where I'm cramped up and I can't move, and you're under the ice. If something happens, you get a free-flowing regulator, and all of a sudden you have to react, but you can't, because you're not thinking right, you're not feeling right, you're not working right, your motor skills aren't there. So it's just putting yourself in liability. Again, that just comes down to decision making. What health issues do you have, including nerve damage? Yeah, I have, I've had frostbite so many times. I've got, just when other people outside are just starting to feel cold, my fingers are already burning. I've had them, frozen so many times, and just those are the main things that bother me. Yeah. Got it. And you just have to be conscious of that then? Yeah, not even really. Just dealing with it's all pain management. Just being cold is the same as, I used to be terrified of getting a sunburn, but getting a frostbite didn't mean anything. To freeze my nose or freeze my cheeks or to freeze my ears. I used to freeze my ears every day walking to school in Yellowknife trying to look cool for the girls, thinking somehow that big frozen pussy ears wasn't as attractive as a hat. And I refused to wear a hat, by golly, but having these big swollen pussy ears was okay. And then my buddy in my class who wore a big goofy hat and a big parka and a scarf, and we all laughed at him. He ended up getting the cutest girl in the class, so we changed our ways after that. But silly things we do. I want to run through some near-death experiences and get you to recall the moments. The first one being second dive when you were 19 years old. Oh wow, you really went deep on research. Yeah, I've had some moments diving that I'm very lucky. Anytime you can have a near-death experience and get to walk away from it and learn from it, it's a very powerful learning tool. It's when it kills you that it's a bad thing. And my second dive out of the course, I had a new dry suit. I didn't even really understand how to use a dry suit. It's different than diving in a wetsuit. I'm 19 years old. I'm diving off of Vancouver Island, British Columbia, just collecting crabs for dinner because I had no money. I was living off the ocean, and my buddy and I had a much bigger tank than he did, and he was just better on air than I was. I didn't understand that at the time, and we're just swimming along, and all of a sudden, I'm out of air. And I'm like, how can I be out of air? He's not out of air. So I'm sitting there burning up valuable time processing that I've just run out of air, and I'm 40 feet deep, and I have way too much lead weight on because I'm pushing along the bottom, digging up these crab. And so I reach up and I grab them, and we start to share our air. We're going up to the surface, and I keep trying to add air to my suit, but I have no more air. Just stupid stuff. And we start sharing back and forth, but I'm starting to hog his air now because I'm kicking so hard to go up because I have no air to put into my suit or my BCD. And we start kicking up all this sediment. All of a sudden he loses me, he lets me go. I sink back to the bottom now, and I'm tired, and he's gone up to the surface. And I'm back on the bottom, and I'm like, but I've just done all my training, and I know that you have to dump your weight belt, no problem. I go to dump it, all I'm grabbing are lead bricks. All my belt has spun around on my suit, and the belt buckle's underneath my tank. And as I'm feeling this, I'm starting to black out. I feel myself going down. I'm just like, and it was not that scary at that point. It's sort of almost peaceful, but I remember thinking, oh, my buckle's under my tank, and just frantically, not frantically, but just grabbing. And all of a sudden, it was my buddy on the surface, and he shook me. He's like, dude. And I sort of went down on the way up. I blacked out, and just that close to hit the surface and him shake me. And I'm like, and like to have not held my breath and popped the lung, to have not, all these things that could have gone wrong on the way up and could have drowned. And that was just like, wow. So you don't think I don't check my gauge every 10 seconds on a dive? You're just like, after thousands of dives. And I had another one like that where I'm down at 120 feet with a buddy, ran out of air. But I look at my gauge, and I've been checking it, and the gauge still says I have half a tank. What's happened is that through bad gear maintenance, my gear's corroded, and it's stuck at 1,500 PSI. And, I'm questioning it now. And my buddy, again, was a long ways away, and I kicked and kicked to him. And by the time I grabbed him, I was just like, I was like holding my breath for a long time, and we went up to the surface again together. And it's just all those things you feel really lucky to be able to learn from those moments.
Chasing the walrus in Greenland and your regulator freezing.
So diving with walrus is like diving with hippos. It's just, nobody does it. It's stupid. You're going to get killed if you do it. And it's one of those, as you're going down, chasing walrus, and in this case, really bad visibility. We were very unlucky with a big algae bloom. The water was terrible, the viz. And chasing this animal that's got a really notorious for having a bad temper. I've had them attack me before. I've had them put their tusks through my boat. I've had them rip open the floor of my Zodiac before. And now here we are getting in the water with them to try and reveal their world, to the rest of the world, and how they eat clams and how they feed. And it's just, it was fascinating. You're excited to do it, but the whole time you're like, I'm going to die if I do this. I'm not going to come back from this. And all of a sudden, finally, this sea ice came into this bay where the viz was bad, and just the cooling effect of the water and all this ice there, it killed the algae bloom that was going on, all that photosynthesis, and the water cleared up, and the walrus were in there feeding, and I jumped in the water one day, and I'm down deep. I went deeper to get into the clear water, and I'm at 100 feet deep, and I'm chasing these two big bull walrus, and I'm swimming as hard as I can, and I'm just out of breath. I'm just like burning up, and I'm alone, and I'm got my big housing. I can see these two walrus in front of me, and in my mind, I'm like, I'm going to fail this story for National Geographic. This will be the first. I'm not thinking I'm going to die or this is dangerous. I'm thinking I'm going to fail, and that's a dangerous place to be. And all of a sudden, no air. And at that point, when I'm already that deprived of oxygen, I'm done. If you dump your weight belt, which is what you would do, and you'd probably survive if it'd been in the open water, but if you dump your weight belt under ice, you get stuck underneath the ice. You're going to be 40 pounds too buoyant at the surface, so you can't dump your weight belt. And now I just start going for the surface. I can't add any air to my thing. I'm already a little bit heavy. I just start kicking for the surface, and I'm like, so I've always been curious how I'm going to die, and I'm like, okay, I got it. I know. And as I'm going up, I'm getting lightheaded, and just gave me the air again. So it's just so funny just mentally to go down that path of, I know how I'm going to die. And then and I sent the regs out after that, everything to get serviced. And what they figure was that ice, there was so much moisture, the way we were filling our tanks in Greenland in the evening when it was very humid, that it was just building up moisture in the tank, and ice formed inside the tank and blocked it. And so lucky that it formed, blocked it, and then released again. But that was a close one. I just had another one in Antarctica where I was diving under an iceberg, again 29 degree Fahrenheit water, and and just filming, and it's all going great. And all of a sudden I got this free flow from this new regulator that from Sherwood that they were asking me to test this new model. The interstatic pressure of that reg was so amped up, I should have checked it again, but it's just blowing cold air into my mouth. And by the time I got to the surface, no big deal, got up, free flow, I know how to deal with that, had my camera up, I pulled that reg out of my mouth, and like liquid nitrogen, like this kind of steam came out of my mouth, and I realized I couldn't feel my tongue, I couldn't feel any of my teeth. I'd frozen the entire inside of my mouth. And from there I had, I was sick for almost a year just with the amount of damage I did to my lungs from that, just breathing that cold air under high pressure on a dive.
Set the scene and explain what happens when you were filming breeding elephant seals.
Yeah, another one where elephant seals are again like hippos. They've got really bad tempers. And nobody had filmed breeding elephant seals underwater in Antarctica. And it's one animal that will swim up to a Zodiac with 10 guests in it, bite down on that boat and fling people into the water. That's happened down there. They have wicked tempers, and during the breeding season, you've got an 8,000-pound animal. That's an animal that's 18 to 20 feet long. It weighs as much as an F-350 pickup truck, and he's got teeth that are 5 inches long, and he's got a bad personality. And generally, they're pretty nice, but they're during the breeding season, they're either going to kill you or breed you. And I thought I still need to get an underwater picture of a big adult male elephant seal. And I swam.
So all that considered, you're like,
all that
still
considered,
gotta do
I'm
it.
like, finally we had clear viz. I could see an elephant seal in the water. The mistake I made is I didn't realize that it was the dominant breeding bull, that he was going to kill and attack any other male elephant seal or any other threat that came near his harem of 300 females that he was breeding. We saw other males drown and kill females in the surf zone, breeding them in the surf, because these are 1,500-pound females that they're drowning but just getting on top of them and trying to breed them. They're so horned up to pass on their genetics that, all that factored, I still jumped in the water and I swam up to this big bull, and I'm alone. My assistant is down the beach, and I'm swimming up to this bull, and right away he sees me, and I saw a boulder. I was nervous, my heart's pounding. I'm like, again, this is a bad idea. If you do this, you're going to die, but I'm going to ignore that because I've survived every other time. I went up behind a big boulder. It's only 4 feet deep, and this boulder's almost to the surface, so I'm with this boulder hiding behind it, and he sees me. His eyes are this big, and he shoots straight over to me. And here comes this 18-foot-long, 8,000-pound dominant breeding elephant seal, and I'm just like, oh, shit. And as he came so fast, he came right around the rock. I now have nothing between us, and he rears up, and I'm down in 4 feet of water on my back, and he's coming up on top of me, and his head's probably, over 3 feet wide, and he lunges at me in this head, and I'm looking in his mouth, and as he tries to bite down on me, all I can do is shove my dome inside his mouth, and I can see his big teeth, and he's trying to bite me, he's trying to crush me, and every time he tried to lunge on top of me, all I could do to push off him was to get my dome in his mouth and push off him and push off him. So I kept pushing away from him as he's trying to bite me and crush me. And then I started to get closer to the shore. Now I'm in 3 feet of water. I tried to stand up so I could, I got flip fins on. I can't stop to do anything. And every time he hit me, I was just like, the force of when him hit was just the bang. And now I stand up. And as I stood up, he saw that as a challenge. When they fight, they rear up to 10 feet high in the air, these males, and they slam their chests together like thousands of pounds of force. He reared up to 10 feet high and just threw himself at me, and I just got out of the way of that, and I started, I was like, I was screaming, like, boom, take another hit from him. Finally, my guy I'm working with saw I was in trouble, and he came running down the beach, and he just came out and was waving at it, turned on him for a second, and I crawled out of the beach, and just, again, bad decision, my fault, not the fault of the elephant seal, just I made a stupid decision, and it almost cost me, but I got in the water with another breeding bull after that, and I got his picture, so it was good.
To what extent do you think when your time comes, it ends up being on a shoot?
Yeah, I just somehow feel like all the 20 lives that I've burned up, I feel like, I wouldn't again say I'm invincible, but I'm to a point where I've reeled myself in a bit, and I feel like I'm good to go. I don't think it's gonna happen. I'm more scared being in a car on a highway. There are enough people in the world who are I've almost been hit by a semi when I'm riding my road bike, on a highway, or I feel like my time, unfortunately, I'm not scared of death. I just don't want to die in a car, you know, bleeding out with the jaws of life going, and just because some drunk driver hit me or somebody was texting, or, you know, I mean, if I die doing what I love doing, then so be it. You know, it's the journey I'm on, and there's urgency to the stories that I'm telling, and death, the fear of death doesn't factor into my world. But at the same time, I know that I need to stay alive if I'm going to keep telling these stories.
I want to run through a few of your notable shoots.
Yeah.
The first one being the polar bear through the window photograph. How did that happen?
Oh, I was working in Svalbard, Norway, and, you know, through the climate change, we had to put the story on hold for a few years. You know, historically, there's ice surrounding Svalbard, and for the few years, just due to loss of ice and warming temperatures, there was no ice. And so we kept putting it on hold, and finally I found a guide I could work with, Carl Erik Wilhelmsen, and we agreed to go out on our snowmobiles and try and document polar bears. But we were having a hard time finding them because there was no sea ice. There was just this little strip along land, and we were sitting out a blizzard in this little cabin, and we played a lot of Yahtzee, and we were just hanging out and you know, waiting for the weather to improve, and all of a sudden I looked up and there's this polar bear staring at me through the window. But it was an image I wanted to make. It was one I was excited, it was one I had sketched out. I mean, these bears, when they're hungry, they get into trouble, they come into contact with man, they get killed, they get shot, they don't come off the quota. I wanted to show in one image and tell a story that these animals are coming into contact with humans. And so all of a sudden, here's this moment. The bear's looking at me through the window, but the window's kind of dirty, it's iced up. So I opened up the window, and all of a sudden I'm sitting here 2 feet away from this female polar bear, and she's beautiful, and she's looking at me, and but I realized I couldn't. Her face was too much in shadow. It was so bright behind her, and there wasn't enough light coming out of this dark, dingy cabin. And all I had to put light on her face was I grabbed my laptop computer, which luckily had a little bit of battery left, and had put it onto a white screen, and I was holding it up about, you know, a foot from her face with a wide-angle lens, and I kept trying to fill in the shadows, and as she's just looking at me through this open window, also hoping that she's not going to come into the cabin, because obviously she's hungry and she's smelling the smells of our food, and she was great. Got a picture of her, and she just went on her way. And that was the situation where my friend, that was Carl Erik, who a few days later died when he went through the sea ice. You know, so it's yeah.
But the polar bear could have gone through.
I think she could have made her way through, and she tried to meet me I went out at one point to go grab a flash to try and pump some light onto her face, and she met me at the door, and I was like, well, that's a bad idea, so I shut the door again. And, you know, generally, I've seen 3,000 polar bears, I've seen 2,000 grizzly bears and 1,000 black bears, and, you know, I've never once had this moment where this bear was out to eat me or kill me. I mean, they're these completely misunderstood top predators that are just out there trying to scratch out a living, and I'm always trying to give them that fair representation.
What did you know about leopard seals going into your famous shoot, and what ended up happening?
You know, I didn't know much about them. I had put in to do a story for National Geographic on leopard seals, and it took a long time to get for things to come together for me to find a boat that I could go to Antarctica with. And I, you know, consulted this gentleman by the name of Göran Elme from Sweden, who's this guy who makes dry suits, and now he makes my dry suits. He is a wonderful filmmaker, worked for BBC for many years, and now he was just making dry suits. And I said, hey, do you want to sort of get back in the game and come out of retirement here, or, you know, get back into the field with me? And he's like, he agreed to do it. He had met the leopard seal. He said it can be extremely intimidating, and I said, I want to do a story and just dispel the myth of this misunderstood predator in Antarctica. If we're going to get people to care about climate change and habitat, and right when Geographic approved the story, tragically in 2004, a scientist was killed by a leopard seal, taken down and drowned, and the world was like, okay, see, they are these vicious animals. And I was like, I got to do this. I got to dispel this myth. And we arrived in Antarctica. It was a 5-day crossing in the roughest seas in the world. Actually, a 7-day crossing.
How was that?
It was beautiful. Beautiful. It was brutal. It was vomiting almost nonstop for the first 3 days, to the point that I thought I might not make it. That my diaphragm was in contraction just from vomiting so much nonstop with no food or water. I mean, just it's so rough being in 20-foot seas in the bow of a little sailboat, going up and down and getting smacked in 50 knots of wind. And it was dangerous to get out of bed. I was always getting thrown out of bed into the wall. You crawl back into bed, just kept puking into my pillow.
When you say you thought you might not make it, meaning what? That you
just going to suffocate. I mean, I don't know. I'm not a doctor. I don't know much about it. But when you're vomiting, it goes like, and you're just dry heaving like that for hour after hour. It is so brutal that it becomes scary. You feel like you're suffocating and just trying to deal with that. But luckily, after 3 days, the storm subsided. And I was able to get some food in and eat some apples and some water. And we get there after a week at sea, and we put the Zodiac in the water, and we go around the corner. And I've never seen a leopard seal before, but this huge female came up to the boat. Her head's bigger than a grizzly bear's, and she's 12 feet long, and we're in a 12-foot Zodiac, and she's as big or bigger than our boat. And she goes off and grabs a penguin, and she comes up underneath the hull of the boat, and we're just sitting there, and she starts to ram this penguin against the hull of the boat, and she's interacting with her. So he and I sit down and we brace ourselves because we don't want to fall in the water. And I'm looking at this huge seal, and then she goes 15 feet away from the boat. She grabs it, and they do this death shake. She shakes it by the head so fast that you can hardly see. There's water flying everywhere, this explosion, all of a sudden there's chunks of meat, and she shakes it so hard she uses centrifugal force to turn the penguin inside out. And so now the skin's off the meat, and now there's just blood and guts in the water, and she's eating this penguin. And that's when Yodan said to me, "This is a good seal. It's time for you to get in the water, yeah?" And I'm like, forget that, except I said, "F that." Everything in my body is like, do not do this. And so he and I started to fight. He's like, "Listen, you told me not enough budget, not enough time, and you had to tell this story in your career at National Geographic. I'll talk. Now you shut up and you get in the water. I've given you your seal. Here is your seal." And I'm like, "Are you kidding me?" I said, so I put on my dry suit. You ever almost been
that convinced you?
Yeah. I was like, he's right. I've made these promises, and they accepted my proposal, and I'm here to get in the water with friggin' leopard seals. Let's get on with the show, buddy. And put my snorkel in my mouth, and I slipped over the edge of the boat. And I mean, objects appear 30% larger underwater than they do above water. So forever how big she looked, she was massive. And she dropped her penguin. She came racing over to me. It was just this massive head, and she starts doing these lunges at me, these threat displays. And Yodan had prepped me and said that these seals can do that. They'll do these cobra-like strikes at you. So she starts doing this, and I'm staring down her throat as she's doing this. But Yodan had told me something funny before I went in the water. He goes, "Listen, if you get really scared, you just close your eyes and she'll go away, yeah?" But he had also said that she was going to do this and she would probably relax. And so I'm putting my strobes on half power. I'm thinking f8, 1/60th of a second, depth of field, get the shot, get your focus right. This is happening as I'm staring into the mouth of the seal where her canines are here and here, and I'm staring in her mouth as she's doing this, and I just start shooting. And after about 5 minutes of her doing this, whatever, maybe it wasn't 5 minutes, maybe it was 20 seconds, I don't know, but she did a bunch of these threat displays, got her penguin, came back and did more. And she's the most dominant, the biggest leopard seal in this entire area of all the other leopard seals were staying out of her way. She had the prime feeding spot, and here I just jumped on her into her habitat. And she does these displays, and then she relaxes and she disappears, and I'm thinking the encounter must be over. I don't know what's going on next. She comes back with another penguin, and she holds it by its feet, and the penguin's trying to get away from her, and this fresh caught penguin, and she lines it up with me, and she lets it go, and the penguin swims over my shoulder, and she goes off and grabs it, and she comes back and does it again and again and again. I'm like, is she trying to offer me a penguin now? Like, this is just too much. Like, my emotions going through my body at this time are just like, are you kidding me? And I keep photographing. She does it again and again, and then she realizes that, I think she realizes at this point that I can't catch a live swimming penguin, so she grabs another penguin and she gets it tired, she gets it worn out, and she tries to offer me that penguin. And then ultimately she started to bring me dead penguins. At one point I had 5 dead penguins floating around my head with her just sitting there. And this I'm telling you this story as if it all happened in a minute. It happened over 4 days. I mean, every time I got in the water, she was there to greet me with a penguin, and was determined to get me to eat a penguin. At once she rammed my dome underwater incredibly hard. I think that there was so much blood in the water and the penguins, and she's eating it, and I'm this far from, all of a sudden my dome is touching her lips in the water, and she rams the camera, thinking maybe it was another leopard seal. Another time she flung a penguin through the air, and I'm in the water like from me to you like this, and near the leopard seal she flings the penguin, which weighs 10 pounds, drills me into the side of the head, and I felt myself almost getting knocked out. It was like bang, and I feel myself sort of closing down, and I'm like, and you just see her change her body language. She starts to watch me like this as you become weak. And I'm like, you hang on to this, buddy. And I'm like, brought myself, like, pretended I was good until I was good, kept shooting, just all these inner things. And then she'd come up to me and she'd blow bubbles in my face, like frustrated that I couldn't accept a penguin. And all this craziness happened. And then on the fourth day, I'm thinking she's really sick of me now because I've shown my complete ineptness. I can't catch or eat a penguin. I don't accept her offerings. She doesn't know why I'm in the water. She's trying to figure it out by trying to offer me, get me to accept the penguin. And then she looks at me and she rolls over on her back and she does this guttural, deep jackhammer sound. That's it vibrates through my whole body. I didn't even know they vocalized like this. And I'm like, okay, now I'm gonna get it. Now she's upset. And she looked at me, and as she did that, she rushed towards me, and I'm like, I'm about to get hit. And she rushed right by me, and as she did that, I looked, and there was another big leopard seal had snuck up behind me, and that whole threat display was for this other big leopard seal, who happened to have a penguin in its mouth. She chased it out of the visibility barrier. I could see them take off together. She grabbed its penguin. I'm assuming it grabbed its penguin because it came back immediately with another penguin in its mouth and offered me that penguin as well. And I was just like, are you kidding me? It's like, it's the most incredible story. I think it's the most incredible thing that'll ever happen to me in my career, where you go from, imagine a polar bear taking you under its wing and trying to feed you seals, or a grizzly bear sitting with you all day long trying to get you to accept a salmon. It just doesn't happen. And to go to meet this vicious predator, to have it nurture me, take care of me, try and feed me, trying to figure me out in its world, and to come back with a set of pictures to this day that I'll never duplicate. And it was supposed to be the hardest assignment of my life, and it was the easiest. I mean, I shot that entire assignment in the first 5 days. You talk about 8 years to get 2 good hours with narwhals. For the first 5 days, I shot the best story of my life, and it's because of this leopard seal.
Likelihood something in your career like that could ever happen again?
I mean, to the point where, a spirit bear here in the Great Bear Rainforest of here we are in Hartley Bay and looking for spirit bears, where I've had a big bear. It took me a long time, but this big male bear who's in a different creek system around here, came down to the creek, and I spent 2 days with it, walking with him through the forest, and he went and slept under a tree, and I slept under a tree next to him, and just hung out with him and took us pictures for 2 days straight. That was powerful, but that was more of an encounter of, you're a fly in the wall, it's letting you into its world, you're a ghost, you're basically non-existent to him, but he's accepted you because he allows you to be 2 feet away from him. That was powerful. But to have a top predator force feeding you I don't think ever happened again.
Tell about accompanying narwhal hunters and how you were conflicted with telling that story.
That's the hardest thing I've ever had to do in my life. That's the hardest story I've ever had to do. The Inuit are in many ways my protectors, my friends, my people who I grew up with, who I look up to deeply, and I'm out on the sea ice with them, living with the Inuit for many years, and I'm witnessing this hunt over the years. I'm witnessing this hunt that is so out of control, where it went from this meat survival, eat for the community, to basically a modern day ivory trade, and where you have 14-year-old kids with high-powered rifles smoking every whale that goes by, hoping that they're going to get it. And when you start to look at the science, that there's a 5-to-1 sink ratio, that 5 whales are being shot and sunk and lost for each one that they get. Aerial studies have been done that show 80% of them have at least 1 bullet hole wound. And when I have my own aerial pictures of narwhals with 7 bullet holes in them, when I'm watching a grumpy hunter blow the head off a baby narwhal because he's in a bad mood and watch it sink, when I watched another hunter out there who got a female and she's pregnant and she's floating there, and he doesn't want it to come off the quota, he wants the male to get the tusk, he punctures her lungs and sinks her under the ice. You start to see this. It's like coming to a place like Hartley Bay, where they revere spirit bears and grizzly bears and they protect them. Imagine if a few hunters started, killing them for their paws, to make ashtrays. Of course you would speak up about it. And, but at the same time, these people are not bad people. They're not evil people. They're just people trying to scratch out a living. The government, the way it's just this dysfunctional system. And they're trying to make money, and here's a way to make money. If they can get $1,000 for a narwhal tusk, they're going to go after it. But killing a narwhal is very, very difficult. Only the really exceptional hunters can do it on a regular basis without a lot of waste. It's all these young people coming up, and I talked to the Inuit about it. I did interviews. I went and talked to Fisheries and Oceans Canada about it, and they said, no, it's fine. It's a well-managed hunt, and all things considered, it's just fine. Nobody wanted to touch it. And so after witnessing this for 8 years, watching, being in the water with baby narwhals while the mom's bleeding out to death, that's way offshore, watching her die a slow death. And a friend of mine watched this female who was killed, and all the males came together and lifted her to the surface on her tusks. It's just like, at some point I went to my editor at National Geographic. I told him the whole thing. He said, well, do you want to do the story now, or do you want to do it when they're all gone? It's your choice. And I'm like, shit, I'm going to go do this. And it was just such a sickening feeling. I would sort of cry myself to sleep every night in my tent, witnessing the slaughter of the animals that I loved, and also the people that I loved. And even halfway through the story, the Inuit in Arctic Bay started to figure out what I was up to, and because the questioning I was asking, and without even asking me, they called my community where I grew up in Lake Harbor with the Inuit, and they said, Paul Nicklen, we think he's doing an expose on our hunting culture. And I was the only one who had access to this. No other film crew could go in and witness this, and because I spoke a bit of the language, and I've been with them friends for so many years. And the people I grew up with said, no, Paul would never do anything bad for the Inuit. He would never say anything bad. The Inuit you're either with Greenpeace or you love them. And in their case, he loves us, so therefore he could never do anything bad for us. And so to have their trust and to use that in many ways to, through their eyes, fry them, to burn them with this coverage. But in the end, I'm like, the Inuit have a voice, politicians have a voice, everybody has a voice. These narwhals do not have a voice, and I'm watching them get slaughtered. It's like seeing thousands of elephants left dead, on the plains, with just their tusks taken. And in the end, I did it. I went ahead and did it, and it was just the worst experience of my life, to the point that I was just absolutely, nauseous, sick about it. And I released it, and we thought there would be a storm over this story, and it was way worse than we ever thought. It really...
How so?
Just upset the communities, just upset the hunters, upset the people. They're still upset. I mean, I still have many friends in the Arctic, and I still have a lot of my closest friends live in the north, and we stay in touch, but there are also a lot of hunters who are still upset. They just betrayed their trust, and I'd probably do it again. It banned the export of ivory from Canada for a couple of years, but now it's in full swing again. It's still back to it. The hunt still continues. So in a community that gets quoted as 150 narwhals, they'll be killing 600 or 700 narwhals just to get their quota, and that much waste and sinking continues. And Fisheries and Oceans in Canada, to me, is one of the most corrupt organizations in Canada, and they not only protect this hunt, it's their mandate to manage this hunt, but they will lie and protect it, to the point that, they do not want to deal with the cultural fallout of shutting down this hunt. So they're going to allow it to continue. And not only that, they're going to protect it and protect it from the world's eyes. And as journalists, this is what we do.
You said you thought you failed that assignment. How so?
I failed in that all I wanted with that assignment was to wake up the Canadian government to manage narwhals better. Of course, the Inuit need to hunt. Of course, they need to live off the land. They need to eat meat. But when the Canadian government allows these hunters to shoot these animals, and they take the tusk and they take the skin and they leave 3,000 pounds of meat rotting on the ice, and there's a 5-to-1 sink ratio, and for the government to say it's more like a 2-to-1 ratio, and that's acceptable, I find that such a gross mismanagement of an animal and a population and a species that I don't blame the Inuit. I don't see the Inuit as doing anything wrong. It's like when you allow your kids to go outside every night and get into trouble and get into drugs and do things wrong, and you never scold them or give them any, and yet you say you're the parent or you're protecting them, but you're not, then all of a sudden things get a lot worse. So in a sense, I failed because all I did was really upset the Inuit, and the Inuit came out of this looking bad, and the government hardly got mentioned. The government can defend themselves. They're very articulate, and they're used to being a bunch of politicians, and they can, worm their way out of anything. Whereas the Inuit just came out and just like with egg on their face in this, and And that was never my intention. My intention was to wake up the government to all of a sudden find a happy solution to this hunt. And I thought I found the formula of doing an expose undercover thing, and I just really hurt a lot of my friends, and the hunt continues today, so I've failed deeply.
Most satisfying moment from your career would be what?
I think finally, after 8 years with narwhals, to finally be in the water with them and have a group of 12 male narwhals, which I had been pursuing for all these years, come by right next to me. That was very, very gratifying moment. But it's not even that. It's the biggest ones are, the biggest, most satisfying moments are now, when after sort of the fruits of all this work, when you get an announcement here in Hartley Bay with the First Nations that they've canceled the Northern Gateway pipeline of running 300 big oil tankers through this habitat every year, knowing that deforestation's been greatly reeled in here, banning death nets off the coast of California, these big drift nets that kill randomly. Those are the victories that mean everything to me. The awards, the accolades, all of it is just a small affirmation, but the big wins are these victories of protecting habitats and species.
How do you find the balance between being a photojournalist and conservationist?
It's so funny. I went on this journey of being a scientist to a pretty picture photographer. So science left me feeling empty. So excited to be a pretty picture photographer and just to see my images published in magazines. I started to feel very empty very quickly in doing that. And then from there to become a National Geographic photojournalist, that was really exciting for about 10 years. And I'm like, I need to do more. And National Geographic is amazing, but to work for 2 years on a major project and to have 12 images published in a magazine that are there for 1 month and gone forever after that, meanwhile I'm on the next story, I would rather work with a small team, produce the work, and right away, you might be on an assignment for only a week, and then pump those images into our blueprint, into our circle of success at Sea Legacy, and have conservation wins. And that excites me a lot more. So now I'm fueled by, what's the outcome? We need to say this. We need to have a conservation win. That's what fuels me now.
You, a while back, pitched your Nat Geo editors about making an emotional plea to your readers. Take me into the room and the conversation that took place around that.
All the stories I'd been doing for National Geographic were based on hardcore science. I still had that science background behind me. I was young, and I said, look, can I just try a new formula? Can I write a story for National Geographic? Photographers almost never get to write in National Geographic. I said, let me write a story. Let me photograph it. Let me do an emotional plea to the readers. Let people understand that the ice in the Arctic is like the soil in a garden, that when the ice disappears, that this ecosystem will collapse. And let me connect the dots for people. Let me talk about photosynthesis and phytoplankton and zooplankton and the polar cod and the seals that eat the polar cod and the beluga whales and the narwhals, and at the top of the food chain is polar bears, and how all these species depend on sea ice. And as we see sea ice disappearing, obviously science isn't getting it done. What's going to happen when we lose ice? And I said, can I write it and can I photograph it? And they're like, yeah, it's not what we normally do around here. Photographers photograph and writers write. And I'm like, let me try it. And so they did, and we were shocked that it was not only the #1 story of the year, but it had the highest readership score of any story over the previous 14 years. And I was just like, that's what first set me off down the path of the importance of breaking down the walls of apathy, creating that emotional connection through storytelling, and not just being this sort of old school, dry, unbiased journalism. It was basically a plea, and whether it made a big difference or not, I don't know, but obviously it resonated with people.
How did your idea for a nonprofit come about?
My idea for a nonprofit was very simple, in that my partner, Christina Mittermeier, originally has started an organization called the International League of Conservation Photographers. She took the world's best photographers. She got them working for her for free on the biggest conservation issues facing us today. She had conservation wins, and it just became too big and too much to handle. And as we saw everywhere we go in the world, we see problems with our oceans. And we said, taking on the whole planet is massive. There's already thousands of nonprofits doing conservation work. Let's focus on the oceans. Obviously, the oceans are the lungs of our planet. Every second breath we take comes from the sea. When you see that 95% of the big fish are gone, when you see problems like these death nets, when you see overfishing, you see places like Hartley Bay where we are now, where they have no fish left. The herring and the salmon are pretty much gone. You feel this urgency to the work you need to do, and we have found a blueprint for success where all you have to do is use your camera by the best visual storytellers in the world, shooting video and pictures, forcing political decisions, putting these images in front of the International Court of Public Opinion. We said, let's start Sea Legacy. And it all began in Svalbard, Norway, when I was on the shores and I went to take a wealthy tourist to go see polar bears. And we went back to Svalbard to places that I knew well, where I could find bears to show them and to show the bears to her. And there was no ice around, and we weren't finding any bears, but we ended up finding 2 dead bears on that trip, 2 young, it looked like 2.5-year-old siblings that had starved to death. And they're just lying there with no ice around. And I was like, science isn't getting it done. You know, you look in the newspaper, we know about climate change, all the science is in. You know, anybody who's got half a brain understands that this is the biggest problem facing us as a species today. And it was like, we need to beat the head over the world with this stuff. We need to connect the word emotionally. We need to break down the walls of apathy, and that's going to happen through visual storytelling, where we work with the top scientists. We base our imagery on science, but you have to shoot those artistic, powerful images to start the conversation. And that's when we began Sea Legacy 4 years ago.
Explain the projects that you're currently taking on through Sea Legacy.
Well, with Sea Legacy, we look for where we can make a difference, where we can have impact by bringing in our visual storytelling team. So we look for tipping points. We base it on science. We talk to the scientists. We see where the biggest issues facing our planet are today. We look where we can drive change. So we look for these tipping points. And then from there, we put together a visual storytelling expedition. So we go on expedition, we gather the assets, and from there we have our campaign team that run with these visuals through social media, through television, through big political pushes. And then from there we work towards solutions. And then from there we film our solutions and we create this nice little feedback loop. And we're actually having victories and wins. And it's a powerful thing when all you have to do is use your camera, put these issues in front of an international court of public opinion, get the world weighing in on it, and politicians listen when you get 220,000 signatures on an issue and people start to speak their mind.
What are some of the wins you've had?
Well, one of the big wins is right here. We're so excited to be back here in Hartley Bay. We came here in 2010 when the Northern Gateway pipeline from Enbridge, from the tar sands, was being pushed through this territory to Kitimat, to this coast, where 300 oil tankers, 10 times bigger than the Exxon Valdez, were going to come through these very, very rich, nutrient-rich waters year-round with some of the dirtiest oil in the world on board, and working with the First Nations, using our images, doing a major cover feature for National Geographic magazine on the Spirit Bear, getting another 20 pages about the oil industry and a pipeline through, it was called Pipeline Through Paradise, was that story. So of an 80-page issue, you know, most people get to say, I had one image in National Geographic. Well, we had 80 pages. Out of the 80 pages, we had 40 pages dedicated to this issue. And then to just see the efforts of Pacific Wild and other the nonprofits, every First Nation between here and Alberta came together to stand in solidarity against this, and to eventually, in the courts, through pressure, to have Enbridge shut down the Northern Gateway pipeline project through this territory. It was just a really beautiful victory. We're taking on whaling, the whaling of an endangered fin whale species in Iceland. We've taken on the drift net campaign off the coast of California, when Californians have no idea that there's these mile-long nets out there killing dolphins and whales and seals and sea lions for swordfish fisheries, which shouldn't be allowed in the first place. So that's another one that we're winning, where it's going well. We've banned the oil and seismic exploration in the fjords of Norway, northern fjords of Norway, where the orcas come to feed in the winter on herring. It's just one after another, and we figured out this blueprint. Our team is growing, and we're just going to try and mow these down one after another.
What's the blueprint like, and what's the internal conversation that you guys have in determining whether or not to take on a certain issue or campaign?
The internal conversation is, what's a massive issue? Is it shark finning? Is it, you know, and can we use our voice? We have collectively a massive social media following. We have something called The Swell, where celebrities come in and lend their voice to our causes. We have The Collective, where the best photographers are part of this journey. They're part of our team. And we've got scientists and advisors who help us and steer us. And we have a compass of really knowledgeable, passionate people who help give us direction. And when we collectively come together and we say, we can make a difference on this. We can work with other NGOs, work with scientists, work with other agencies. We can combine efforts, like something like the Death Net campaign. Another organization, Mercy for Animals, had a secret observer on one of the boats who was actually sitting there with undercover cameras filming the killing of dolphins and sharks and these different species on these boats, and the bycatch and the illegal behavior on these boats. And that's just powerful when you can come together, and then we can use our big social media channel. We have access to 150 million people every day that we can put these important issues in front of, and we put it in front of a global audience and let the world weigh in on this stuff. And then from there, we give people a path, a direction, a place that they can express themselves, whether it's writing a letter, signing a petition, whether they're voting or stopping to eat Atlantic salmon or whatever it is, we give them a solution to the problem. And then from there, so that's the blueprint, basically.
What are your long-term goals with Sea Legacy?
Long-term goals are to save the oceans. Without our oceans, we're going to disappear as a species ourselves. It's to really take on the big issues, whether it's climate change, overfishing, from Atlantic salmon fish farms in our waters, whatever it is to basically protect our oceans, create marine protected areas, have them protected, have them enforced. That's one thing, to deal with overfishing in critical habitat, to protect everything from, we call it sea to sky protection, so from the rainforest to the bottom of the sea, from ocean dragging, bottom dragging, to illegal fishing practices, just to poor management, to hold fisheries and oceans accountable, to help hold Justin Trudeau to his target of protecting 20% of marine protected areas by 2020. When you think of 13% of some land areas and countries are protected, you come to the oceans, less than 1% are protected. We need to get that number up. 1% of the most critical habitat in the world isn't protected. We need to bring not everyone's going to get to see the oceans. We need to bring the oceans to everyone, and that's only going to happen using our cameras.
How has the work you're doing to build Sea Legacy impacted your ability to do for-profit work?
It's been a very interesting journey. I never thought I would arrive at this point, but where it's become such a selfless pursuit, where I'm, for the last 5 years, I've been pouring my own personal resources into growing Sea Legacy. Christina's been doing that. We still don't collect a wage, and yet we're starting to raise significant funding. And at some point, when you're turning down paid work, you're turning down assignments with National Geographic, you're turning down lectures and appearance fees because you want to keep growing this conservation movement. At some point, this business model is going to fail when you keep spending tons of money on something, trying to grow it, and then not paying yourself. So we're building a team around myself as well to keep growing my own brand and business, and as well as growing Sea Legacy. But Sea Legacy is first and foremost for us.
How do you think it's impacted you financially?
Just spending a lot of money and not making any after a while. But I was at a point, 3-4 years ago where I could have retired, and it was at that point that it was scary. Like, retire? Why? I've got 30 years left in this body to go out and crush it and grind it out and get these visual assets and lead these people, lead these storytellers. I would care less if I woke up half broke tomorrow. Just, as long as I have enough to survive and to keep leading the charge with this team of passionate people, it's fine. Money will come. I've never worried about money. It's never been a factor in my life that I have to have money. I just want to have conservation wins.
How's that process been for you, though, in figuring out the balance between the nonprofit work, this, the great Sea Legacy that you're trying to build up, and the for-profit work that you'd also like to continue doing?
Yeah, the for-profit work is it's for profit, and I mean the only for-profit work I would much rather than say get paid an extreme amount of money to do a public talk and get paid $100,000 or to make an appearance. If it's to the wrong audience, I'd much rather speak for free at, say, Davos or on the TED stage or the World Economic Forum or to United Nations. I'd much rather speak at all those venues for free. And so I just need to find a way to make that work.
How do you do that?
I just think you do much fewer talks and you get paid a lot more to do it. Or we're finding ways to grow our social media, to using our social. Someone just paid me $22,000 to put a little story on my feed. Now, if I can have this machine working behind me while I'm out doing the work that's important to me, then we found the perfect balance. Someone just made an anonymous donation to Sea Legacy for $400,000 US to set Christina and I free. Like, don't worry about making money. go out there and do your work. Get out there on the front lines, lead your team. And it was like, it's a beautiful gesture. It's a nice surprise. So the money's going to come. We're not worried about that. What I'm really proud of with Sea Legacy is that we've started something called the Tide, which is people are anywhere from $1 to $5,000 a month. People are making these donations, and we're trying to grow that tide where rather than waiting for one corporate sponsor or big generous donations like that, that we can have tens of thousands of people giving $10 a month, which will ultimately turn into millions of dollars a year, allowing our team to be out there basically without money being a factor in the work that we do, just being an autonomous hub of content creation for conservation wins.
And where do people go if they
just go to the website, sealegacy.org. You can just join the Tide, and by there it's like sort of a Patreon account, or where you get to be part of the journey. You get to be behind the scenes and get special access to footage and the work that we're doing. It's been a model that's working. We just need to grow it.
How has social media changed the game for you?
It's been incredible. You know, I thought it was a joke 4 years ago when a couple friends, my buddy Sam Kretschmar and Jenny Nichols, both came to me and said, "Hey, dude, you need to get on Instagram." I'm like, "Come on, I would not reduce my photography, you know, which I see as fine art and beautiful, or for magazines, into little wee squares on, you don't really ever crop your images like that, and why would I do that?" And all of a sudden, I put up a couple of posts, and I actually baited people from National Geographic to my feed. I got 45,000 new followers one day in 3 hours. And, you know, within a year, I'd hit 1 million followers. And I was like, whoa. And then when I opened my gallery in New York, you know, I said, "Hey guys, come on down to the gallery and meet me. I'll be here and we can talk about conservation." And you know, 3,000 people showed up, and there's a lineup around the city block in the rain. We had to hire a guy I know now, Drago from Serbia, to come in as a bouncer to control the crowds, and people were coming in like crying and hugging, and just, I think people are looking for leadership. They're looking for guidance. They're looking for direction. They're looking for hope. And it's become a very powerful thing for me to realize that there are real passionate, smart, intellectual people at the other side of those Instagram followers. It's not just a number of who has how many followers. It's the engagement that I have with my audience that I love, that I can put up a post and talk about an issue, have 10,000 comments on one post. That's 10,000 comments, and those are people debating, discussing, negotiating. I think it's powerful. And forget how many, you know, if you get 1 million likes on a post, great, but I care about the engagement, and that's to have a really engaged audience is important to me.
Yeah, obviously you're putting out great content on your platforms, but that's not easy to do it on a consistent basis. What's the process in which you use for deciding what to put out?
Yeah, you know, people talk about prepping your posts a year in advance, or, you know, a year in advance, prepping your posts a month in advance. I just can't work like that. I love it. I'm like, okay, what are we in the mood for today? And what do I think? What day is it today? And, you know, what's going on in the world today? And so I love to try and engage with everyone. So I'll try and ignite, you know, touch people's nerves, or ignite a conversation. And so I'm always trying to find the perfect picture and the perfect words. And I love it when I was like, boom, there it goes. This one's going to go crazy. And it's just a good feeling.
Who have you been most surprised has reached out to you through social media?
I mean, when I wake up and I'm like, my numbers just jumped 5,000 or 10,000 followers without me doing anything, and I go over to Leonardo DiCaprio's page, and he's just, you know, I don't know if it's him, but it's his people, I guess, but they share a lot of content on his feed. Or, you know, Kelly Slater's writing me, and like, how do I get involved? And it's just like, really? And Eddie Vedder just invited us to his concert this week because he cares about the environment and wants to, you know, talk about Sea Legacy. And then Bryan Adams and I are friends through conservation, you know, so just people I really respect as artists. You realize that they're all people who just care. And there's just a lot of people are starting to come to the surface.
And your favorite experience you've had with any of these people that you spent time with?
I just think, you know, one of my favorite ones was just, I think for all these people, they're so famous, they're so good at what they do, they're so in the spotlight, and to just take them and all of a sudden show them something that they couldn't even fathom ever being, like to be one of my favorite moments, I was working in Svalbard, Norway, and my friend Sean Powell and I were just like living in this dirty little tent, and it's like wet, and we're cold, and we've been eating freeze-dried food for 2 months, and I get a phone call from the National Geographic ship, and they're like, hey, can you come on board tonight? If we move the ship up the coast, we're here with some people, and can you come out and do a talk? I'm like, yeah, sure, I need a shower anyway, and I need this resupply of food, and so we take the Zodiac 150 miles down the coast of Svalbard. We meet up with the ship, I go shower, and I come out to do a talk, and it's a narrow quarters, and in the front row is President Carter, Rosalind Carter, Ted Turner, Larry Page, Madeleine Albright, and it just sort of, each row was a Chevy Chase. I mean, just went on and on and on in the ship, and I'm just like, I haven't talked to another person except Sean for 2 months, and all of a sudden here I am to deliver the keynote that evening, and it was powerful. Then the next day to take President Carter and Rosalind Carter out in a Zodiac and to show them walrus. You're up there with walrus, and they're understanding the importance of sea ice and multi-year ice, and with the loss of ice, it's going to affect species like walrus. It's just a very powerful time to spend time like that with somebody of influence.
How do you reconcile when you're spending time with somebody of influence, and their desire to help out with the fact that they just flew in on their private jet or own, a dozen homes around the world?
I mean, I get the same thing as well. If I listened to every one of my social media followers, I would live in a hemp sack. I would not have a cell phone. I would never have flown in my life. I would not ever have a vehicle. I would live on a deserted desert island, but somehow I would still be as effective in the work that I do in conservation. And you just have to, of course, we all have an impact and an imprint on this planet. My impact, or where I've made a difference, is by not having kids, trying to go vegetarian, working closer and closer to that, just trying to minimize my impact. But sure, I get on an airplane to go do a conservation project. I fly with my excess baggage. And so I don't, if Al Gore is going around the world, flying almost daily, doing lectures on conservation and climate change, then sure, you can always shoot the messenger. You can always find a way to poke holes in people, but I always try and choose to celebrate the good that they're doing.
Obviously, there's a lot that has to be done to combat climate change, but why do you think the world pretty much only comes together when there are major catastrophic events?
I just think everybody cares, everybody's really busy. And you can't afford to care all the time. You got to run your business, you got to care about your family, you got to care, you got to make money, you got to survive on this planet. And all of a sudden, when there's a big disaster, it's like, oh, wait, the whole world cares about this, boom, I'm going to throw some money at it or make a donation, I'm going to get back to my life. It's really hard to wake up every day. And I mean, Al Gore was right when he said an inconvenient truth. It is, we know it's there, but it's super inconvenient to say, hey, you know what, I'm going to switch my vehicle to an electric car, I'm going to, we're not going to go on holidays this year because I don't want to take my family and have a massive carbon footprint. I don't want to build that second house. Maybe we're not going to have our fourth kid. We have to stop eating Atlantic salmon because I hear that's bad. It's, it's exhausting to care. It really is difficult to actually start, to go into Starbucks every day and you're used to getting your, whatever it is, your mocha frappuccino, in a plastic glass, your cold iced latte in a plastic glass with a plastic lid and a plastic straw. Now I'm going to change that. I'm going to if you want to, I really warn people that caring is difficult, but once you start down the path of opening yourself up to factoring our planet in your day-to-day decisions, it's incredibly rewarding, but it's not easy.
How do you view politicians that are climate change deniers?
When I did my first stories for National Geographic on climate change, no scientist that I would work with would go on record and even say that climate change was real. They didn't feel like they had the undeniable data that was in. And now I can go to any one of those scientists, or you can talk to any, true, authentic scientist, and they'll tell you the same thing, that it's the biggest problem facing us as a species today. So when the deniers are out there, of course they're going to take that stand, but they're becoming the minority very quickly, and I'm not too worried about them.
You said we'd be done if President Trump was elected.
I always find a silver lining in everything, and obviously Trump is terrible for the planet, but I think the silver lining in Trump is that he has, if Hillary Clinton had gotten in or Bernie Sanders had gotten in, the whole world would stay relaxed and say, you know what, the leadership is there, we just go on about our lives and let's not worry about this stuff because the government's got it handled. At some point, the world had to wake up and take the day-to-day decisions and hold themselves accountable in the lives that we're leading on this earth and the impact we're having on this planet. And I think Trump has done that. He has woken up the planet. when he came in and you see the destruction that he is causing by dismantling the EPA, opening up like Bears Ears National Monument, the destruction that he's doing, the world has woken up. He started a revolution. I think by the time he's done with his damage, I think the good that's going to come out of people waking up is a much better win.
What are your thoughts on President Trump's environmental policies?
It's obviously a disaster. I mean, he's blowing up everything that he can. I mean, where do you want to begin? From the disregard of First Nations and, Standing Rock and pushing pipelines through First Nations land to, just the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, to climate change, to drilling in the Arctic, to, I think one of the bigger ones for me is drilling in the Arctic. When Obama actually, the White House, the Oval Office called me one morning and said, hey, Obama wants to make an announcement to the world about protecting the North Slope and the Beaufort Sea and banning drilling in the Arctic, and he wants you to release the announcement with him. I almost cried. It was such a compliment from him to even reach out. And we released this press release together, and to see that all blowing up now because of Trump. Well, you saw what the BP oil disaster did. Imagine something in the Arctic under the ice where you couldn't react to it. Even as efficiently as you did with BP, which was a complete disaster. I think that one terrifies me. I just know how rich that habitat is when you've got 50,000 narwhals and beluga whale population and bowhead whales and polar bears and all these species. And you talk about people not meeting their Paris Agreement, hitting their climate change targets, their emission targets. It's just, it's terrifying. The crazy thing for me is that we're just another species on this planet. If all this is crumbling around us, ultimately we will crumble too. And the fact that we can't wake up to that is just mind-boggling to me.
How would you best explain the importance of the oceans?
Without the oceans, we die tomorrow. I mean, the oceans are the lungs of the planet. Every second breath you take comes from the sea. The ocean is the world's biggest grocery store. It's amazing how the ocean, when you get out of its way, how quickly it recovers. It is this over 4 billion years of evolution to arrive at this perfect ecosystem of growing life. But the amount of pressure that we have put on the oceans in the last 200-300 years is just the fact that it's even existing. I mean, Christina, my partner, was just in Ghana here last week filming for Sea Legacy, and they're pulling more plastic out of the ocean in their nets than they are fish. I mean, we've pushed the ocean beyond its breaking point in most places, and we will see the ocean collapse. We are already seeing the ocean show signs of collapsing. When I did the story for National Geographic, in this area on the blob, it's where the water has warmed over 6 degrees over a 2-year period. Well, I photographed 80 sea otters breathing their last breath that are dying from paralytic shellfish poisoning on the coast of Alaska. We're finding dead sea lions, thousands of dead birds and fish, and even fin whales and humpback whales that are dying from toxic algae. So we are seeing the effects. The ocean is one of these things that when it folds, it's going to fold quickly, and it's going to have immediate impacts on us.
So you mentioned some of what you're seeing currently. Like, what do you expect to happen to the oceans?
Yeah, I mean, I expect when I worked as a biologist, on species like the lynx snowshoe hare cycle, you would see bunny rabbits like snowshoe hares, their populations would explode to 1,000 snowshoe hares per hectare in the forest. Like, you'd be walking and there'd be snowshoe hares going everywhere. And in populations that do that, as our population is done right now, when there's a correction in a population, it's never a 5% correction or a 10% correction. It's a 98% correction or a 99% correction. I don't know how our population is going to get corrected, but I'm fearful of what's coming for people if we continue to put this much pressure on our planet. And it's I don't know how it's going to resist or react.
And explain the pressure we're putting on the ocean currently.
When you think that almost all the big fish have been removed from the ocean. When you have wiped out tuna populations and this food that we've lived off of, but now there's so many people demanding food from the oceans. When you look at this coast right here where we're taking Atlantic salmon fish farms, again authorized by Fisheries and Oceans Canada, and we're putting them on this coastline, a fish that should not be in these waters. And you get Piscine rheovirus, which is a blood virus, which is killing the wild salmon. And as you saw yesterday, standing on the shores of these rivers, the salmon are gone. That river we were near yesterday, as Cameron Hill, a friend of ours here, has told us, or Marvin explained yesterday, any of these rivers, if you went back 100 years, you'd be able just to walk across the backs of the salmon. Well, these bears are they're looking at, 20, 30 fish in a creek. This creek that we saw yesterday is doing well compared to all the others. It might have 1,000 fish in it. It should have 60,000 fish in it. So you think of when the salmon have collapsed, the herring have collapsed, the water temperatures are warming and seaweed populations are collapsing. Seaweed, the big kelp forests are underwater rainforests that are the safety and the sanctuary for all these small fish that are part of this ecosystem. They've all disappeared. We're seeing ochre stars, which are the beautiful starfish that are basically melting. You see them dying on the rocks because the water's warm, and the amount of pollutions and toxins and plastic that we're pushing in the ocean, it's just, we're hitting at it from every level, every angle.
How much of an inability is there to stop the loss of sea ice?
We're going to lose a lot more sea ice before we ever say it. The only way we can save sea ice is to reduce carbon emissions. That's it. Whether it's through the cattle industry, it's through fossil fuels, that's where we have to address it. There's not going to be any magic cure. People talk about putting a garden hose in the sky and creating a vapor barrier, a water, a cloud barrier between the sun and Earth. I mean, that's an asinine solution. We're talking about moving to Mars. Let's reduce our carbon footprint on this planet, and let's save ice and save these ecosystems and ultimately save ourselves. It's pretty simple math.
Early 2000s, you go through the Northwest Passage on an icebreaker. How much different is it today versus then?
When I went through, we were smashing ice all the time. We had Canada's largest icebreaker that was smashing ice just to get through it. I could hardly sleep. You're at the water level. It sounds like someone's beating on your room with a sledgehammer. And this is ice that lives for many years, ice that's up to 10 feet thick. Well, that ice is all but gone. My friend who I'm working with here, Scott Barnes, he took a little rubber boat through the Northwest Passage. And I said, did you hit any ice? Oh, no, we never saw ice. So little sailboats are going through. This year they brought a cruise ship through the Northwest Passage with 2,000 guests on it, on a ship that can't touch ice or go near ice. It's that open now. And all of a sudden, rather than major alarm bells going off, countries are all talking about the possibilities for industry, for ship traffic, for how do we take this to our advantage? What can we drill? Where can we drill for oil in this new open frontier? And we have the very much the wrong reaction to the current state of ice in the Arctic.
Explain what happens as we continue to lose sea ice.
As we lose ice, you're losing the foundation of an ecosystem. It's very much like losing soil in the garden. Like you think without soil a garden can't grow, but as you lose ice, you're losing the foundation of that ecosystem. So I've explained this already, but to put it in a more succinct way, what happens with ice in the Arctic? So in the spring, when the sun returns to the Arctic, you get obviously photosynthesis. You get algae growing under the underside of that ice, and you start to see already how an upside down underwater garden is starting to form. When you get the photosynthesis, you get the phytoplankton. Then from there, you get the zooplankton. You get the copepods and amphipods. And in Antarctica, it's the exact same thing, except you get the krill there, which is a biomass greater than humans on Earth that feed on all this phytoplankton under the ice. From there, you get the polar cod and other species. It is a massive biomass that feeds on the zooplankton, and then you get the seals that feed on the cod. You get the narwhals and the beluga whales and the seals and the harp seals and the ring seals, the bearded seals that are feeding on the cod. Then you've got the polar bears, obviously, that feed on. Then you start to see how all of this ecosystem, basically when you have no ice, you get very low production back into that ecosystem. Ice really is an inverted garden.
How has your ability to photograph polar bears changed as sea ice reduces?
It's just becoming more difficult. The Inuit and a lot of other people are saying, hey, look, there's more polar bears than ever because these bears are being forced in communities or near communities. When you lose ice, they're ending up with smells around humans and coming into conflict with humans. So it's, but the bears, there's still some out there, and there's still bears out there, but we are finding skinnier and skinnier bears out there, and I think that's the famous bear that we filmed recently, the dying polar bear. We can't prove that that's because of climate change. We can't prove that that's because of a lack of ice, but I have found more dead bears that have starved to death. And again, I don't just go look for my own data set of my own photographs, and I go talk to the scientists. When I talk to the scientists in Alaska, and they're saying, yeah, we're finding dead bears that are floating out in the open ocean. When we're finding bears that are having to swim over 400 miles to get from ice to land, that's not how they've evolved. They have not evolved. So what's happening with ice is that it's melting earlier every spring, and it's freezing later every fall. Bears, if they have enough fat, are designed to go for fairly long periods of a few months without eating. But imagine now that ice that melts in an area that used to historically have ice year-round is now melting in June and July and disappearing, and it's not freezing till October. That bear now has to survive for 6 months without ice. Bears are not omnivores. They can't live on vegetation and seaweed. They must eat meat. They eat seals. So without ice, bears need ice in order as a platform to hunt seals. So it's very basic math, and it's just trying to keep using the power of photography to keep reminding people of this simple math.
How did you find the emaciated bear and describe what you saw?
I was on an expedition. A very generous supporter of Sea Legacy invited us to come up on his boat and show him around the Arctic. They had just announced that they were going to create a marine protected area in Lancaster Sound. I thought, well, let's at least go celebrate that and talk about the importance of creating marine protected areas. Celebrate Trudeau's target of creating 10% of marine protected areas in Canada by 2020. Seemed like a step in the right direction. But near the end of the expedition, we come around the corner and we see looked like basically snow on top of a rock. And then as it moved a little bit, I could see that it was just this emaciated polar bear draped over a rock. And I called in the Sea Legacy team, so they came up to the north. We brought all our cinematic equipment and all our gear, and we, the only thing we could do at this moment of seeing this bear was film it. And so we got on land a long distance away, and we waited for hours, and waiting to see if the bear was dead or going to die, or we didn't know what it was going to do, but it just eventually slowly woke up and labored to its feet and dragged itself across the tundra. It looked like The Walking Dead, and we were hiding in an old Inuit settlement and like a little outpost camp, and so we wouldn't be in view. If the bear couldn't see us, we didn't want to affect its behavior, and it dragged itself towards a garbage can and was eating an old foam burnt snowmobile seat or a motorcycle seat and just salivating, and you could see that he was not long for this world, hours, maybe days. And then he didn't get any food there, and he just slowly walked down to the ocean and got into the ocean and swam off around an island. And then, it's just, we were just, the whole team just stood there crying, just everyone's crying openly, and we're just filming this moment of watching this big, dominant male bear drag himself like that. For me, what was important about that is when scientists say that 30% of the population of polar bears is going to disappear by the year 2050, and they're going to disappear as a species. They'll become extinct in the next 100 years plus. I want people to know that's just not science. That's just not data points falling off a piece of paper. This is what it looks like. That's all I was trying to say with that video is, this is what a starving polar bear looks like. They're dying. Ultimately, they're going to disappear because of the lives and the impact that we've had on this planet. Are you okay with that? And obviously, it brought out the deniers and the haters and all the pushback. But there was more good and positive that came out of it than the negativity.
How tough is it for you to be on the front lines, like actually watching that?
Yeah, brutal. I got into this work because I love these animals. I want to tell their story. I want to give them a voice. I want to spend time with them. I want to celebrate them, and to sit there witnessing that, and it's ripping your heart out, and you're crying again, and you're upset, and you're saddened, and you're also angry, and but you feel this urgency to the work that you're doing to get this out in front of the world. And it's a very scary time, but it's a very opportunistic time that we have these new social media channels that, not that they're the end all, but all of a sudden if you can shoot something like that, and through the metrics that we did, we got over 2 billion views apparently, 2 billion impressions on that video, and that's powerful. It was the #1 climate change story in the year in 2017. It was the most viral video in the history of National Geographic. Christina's picture was one of Time Magazine's top 10 images of the year. And if we did get 2 billion, if it's not 2 billion, it's 1 billion or 700 million, who cares? It's like it reached a good chunk of the planet, and that is the power of a camera.
What do you remember seeing from walking the beaches in Mexico and sea turtles digging nests?
It was amazing. I went to this Ciencan, which is this beautiful park in Mexico, south of Tulum, and we were sort of seeing so much the destruction to the beaches and all the resorts in Cancun, where they basically have destroyed all the nesting habitat. So let's just go. and be in nature in Mexico. And so we're walking the beach, and all of a sudden we see this path where this turtle has struggled up the beach, crawling over plastic bottles and old ropes and nets, and where it decided, chose to dig its nest, and where it was trying to even get to the sand, it's just moved these two mountains of plastic on either side of where it dug its nest, and then you see it give up, and you see the tracks return to the sea, and it couldn't actually get through the plastic to lay its eggs in the sand. And that's where that turtle was born. That's where, like these salmon, it returns to its natal area to lay its eggs, and it couldn't even do it because of the amount of plastic. And that's in a protected sanctuary in Mexico.
How would you explain what disposable plastic is doing?
For 15 years or 20 years, photographers have been photographing albatross that they go get so much plastic from the sea, they feed their chicks that all their chicks are dying because their bellies are so full of plastic they can't retain any other food. And so you see all these carcasses rotting on land, and all that's there is a belly full of plastic. Whales are dying with plastic in their bellies. Most turtles nowadays that are dead or that they find sick in the ocean are full of plastic, because they're eating plastic bags that they think they're turtles. And now they're finding there's so many microplastic and microfibers in the ocean that are these plastic beads that are in our drinking water now. And it's like, if we always keep continuing to wake up too late, then ultimately it's going to catch up to us, and it is catching up to us. And we're shocked that so many people are dying of cancer, like as if it's some big surprise. But when you see the amount of toxins that we put in our body, when an orca, a killer whale here, dies, it becomes a toxic waste site. It's so full of PCBs. There's just so many pollutants and contaminants in the ocean.
What recommendations would you have for people in terms of ways to make easy changes to their lifestyle?
Recommendations are try and become vegetarian or get damn close to it. Stop eating so much red meat. Stop eating Atlantic salmon. Stop using plastic. Stop accepting plastic at any Starbucks or any coffee shop. Stop using plastic bags. I was just in Rwanda, and it's a $40,000 fine flying into that country if you get caught with any plastic in your luggage, any plastic bag. It's the cleanest country I've ever been to in my life. You walk those streets, it looks like it was just polished that day. It's just because they banned plastic. That's just it. The question is, what kind of planet do you want to leave for your kids and your grandkids? Ask yourself that. And maybe some of the changes we make now have to be hard. And for some people to stop using a plastic cup at Starbucks, that's a hard change for them, but that should become an easy change. People should wake up and say, we think about love, we think about sex, we think about money, we think about all these things, on a minute-by-minute basis. But we spend very little time thinking about how do we make this a better planet, which is our life. This is our foundation. We're not moving to Mars. I love Elon Musk. I think he's an amazing guy. I think he does really cool stuff. I think he's a genius, but I don't want to move to Mars. I don't know anybody else who would want to move to Mars. Here is, again, 4 billion years of evolutionary perfection of this place that has evolved to take care of us, to feed us, to give us water and air, and we're just beaten down on it. And at some point, it's just going to give up. So it's, what was the question?
Recommendations for changes you think people could make to their lifestyle.
You have to think every time. People need to allow themselves to become aware. They need to allow themselves to care. Then they need to, from there, vote. Every time they go to basically every time you go to a grocery store and you pull out your Visa to buy something, you're making a major decision, whether it's getting beef or getting Atlantic salmon, or from what you put in your mouth, from what you buy, from what you order in a restaurant, from what you feed your kids, from what you drive to what you build to live in. You're making major decisions every time, and we just have to start factoring the earth in when you make those decisions. You have to really think about the impact that you're having on this planet. So if you are able to, people need to become aware and they need to care. Let me change that. People need to care and they need to become aware. They need to educate themselves. And then from there, you have to ask yourself what you're willing to do. How much do you care about this planet that we all share? And it's, if you can stop eating Atlantic salmon, never order Atlantic salmon. It's farm raised, it's killing our oceans. Just stop doing that. It's plastic. We need to remove plastic from our day-to-day lives. We need to factor in the amount of our carbon footprint on this planet, from flying to driving and what we drive to the way we heat our homes, and to just whether you're going to have that third or fourth kid. You know, if you're like really on the fence about it, if you factor in the planet, you're not going to have that third or fourth kid. That's probably the biggest sacrifice you can make. And it's, I don't know what to say.
You interviewed out now?
I'm good. That gave you some energy.
Cool.
Good. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you, sir.
What's the longest interview you've ever done? Is this it?
No, we've done longer before.
Okay.